Welcome to this sacred space, a place of ancient wisdom and inner calm. Over the next 3 hours, you will embark on a journey through timeless teachings that have guided seekers for over 2 millennia. These are not mere stories. They are gateways to unlocking deep shifts in how you live, handle challenges, and find lasting peace within. Whether you are searching for better sleep, relief from stress, or a deeper sense of meaning, these ancient stories speak directly to the modern soul. Each tale offers healing for the heart, transforming ordinary moments into opportunities for growth. Find your most comfortable position, close your eyes if it helps, and let these gentle teachings wash over you like moonlight on still water. The impossible choice. In a world that moves ever faster, there once lived a merchant who seemed to have it all. Expansive homes filled with treasures, fertile lands stretching as far as the eye could see, and most cherished of all, 3 young children whose laughter filled his days with joy. Yet, despite having everything one could desire, this father found himself constantly consumed by the demands of his work, always chasing the next goal. One afternoon, while the merchant was away tending to his business, disaster struck. A terrible fire broke out, spreading rapidly through the wooden house. When news reached the merchant, his heart nearly stopped. He rushed home, only to find the house fully engulfed in flames. But what shook him to his core was the sight of his 3 children, still inside, playing with their toys, unaware of the imminent danger. "Children, come out now," he shouted with all his might. "The house is on fire. You need to leave immediately." But his desperate calls went unheard. The children, lost in their play, could not grasp the urgency in his voice. Each second felt like an eternity to the heartbroken father. In that moment, he remembered something that always managed to capture his children's attention. With a burst of inspiration, the father called out, his voice full of excitement. "Children, I have something wonderful waiting for you outside. There are beautiful carts, goat carts, deer carts, and mighty ox carts. Come quickly and choose whichever one excites you most." The moment the children heard the word carts, their eyes widened with wonder. Dropping their toys, they rushed towards the door, their hearts racing not with fear, but with eagerness. In an instant, they were safe outside, breathing fresh air, their excitement outweighing their previous oblivion. "Father, where are the carts you promised?" the youngest child asked eagerly. The merchant smiled, filled with relief. From behind the house, he produced a single cart, one unlike any the children had ever seen. This was no ordinary toy. It was made of the finest materials, adorned with precious gems, and draped in silk as soft as clouds. It was far grander than anything he had promised, more magnificent than the children could have ever imagined. When Buddha shared this parable, he revealed something profound about human nature. The burning house symbolizes the suffering that fills our daily lives, the stress, anxiety, and dissatisfaction that rob us of our peace. Like the children, many of us remain unaware of the dangers that surround us. We become so absorbed in temporary distractions that we fail to see how these attachments burn away our true happiness. Modern science echoes this ancient wisdom. Our brains are wired to seek immediate rewards, often overlooking the long-term consequences. The loving Father represents wise guidance, whether from teachers, books, or our own inner wisdom. Sometimes, direct warnings about life's dangers are not enough to provoke change. Therefore, wisdom takes a compassionate, skillful approach, meeting us where we are, speaking to us in ways we can understand. The various carts in the story symbolize the different practices that help us grow. But the magnificent cart represents something extraordinary, The realization that peace has always been within our reach, far more beautiful than we ever imagined. Now, take a slow breath and notice how your body feels. Ask yourself, what burning house am I living in today? It could be a toxic relationship, a stressful job, or an endless cycle of distractions. Do not judge yourself. Just observe with kindness. For the next week, begin each day by asking yourself, what am I so absorbed in that I am missing the bigger picture? Then take 3 conscious breaths, stepping outside the burning house of unconscious living. See how this small shift can alter the course of your day. You are not trying to fix anything, simply cultivating the awareness to see clearly. This ancient story speaks directly to the modern condition. We often chase external achievements, the next promotion, a new relationship, or the latest gadget, believing they will bring lasting satisfaction. But like the toys the children played with, these things are fleeting distractions from deeper fulfillment. The Father's words were not lies. They were a compassionate way of guiding his children towards something more valuable. When you feel caught in cycles of desire and disappointment, remember the magnificent cart. True contentment does not come from acquiring what we think we want, but from discovering the peace that has always been within us, the burning house of modern life. Its constant distractions, pressures, and notifications cannot touch the sanctuary of awareness you carry with you everywhere. As you rest tonight, listen to the gentle rhythm of your breath. Consider that perhaps the escape you long for is not to another life, but to a new way of seeing the life you already have. The sound that changed everything. In a peaceful monastery hidden among whispering bamboo groves, there lived a young monk who was full of frustration. Day after day, he watched his fellow monks as they went through their practices. But instead of feeling peaceful, he became more irritated. Some monks walked too slowly during meditation, others chanted off-key during prayers, and still others seemed to lack the dedication he believed was necessary for true enlightenment. His mind became a battlefield where judgment and anger fought against his desire for inner peace. This was no casual seeker. The young monk had entered the monastery with the purest intentions, truly desiring to become enlightened. Yet, the more he observed, the more agitated he became. The very people he considered his spiritual companions had become his sources of constant annoyance. One evening, after a particularly frustrating meditation session, where his mind had been far from still, the young monk could no longer contain his irritation. He approached Buddha, who sat serenely beneath an ancient Bodhi tree. The moonlight filtered softly through the leaves, casting shadows on the master's tranquil face. Even in such peace, the young monk was visibly disturbed. "Master," he began, his voice tight with barely controlled emotion, "I came here seeking peace. Yet all I feel is irritation. My fellow monks disturb me. They move too slowly, they chant wrong, and they lack focus. How can I cultivate patience when everything around me tests my limits?" Buddha listened with deep attention, his gaze full of understanding and compassion. There was no judgment in his eyes, only the kind of patience that only true wisdom can offer. When the young monk finished speaking, Buddha smiled gently and gestured for him to sit down. "Let me tell you a story about 2 monks who lived here. In this very grove of bamboo," he said. "The first monk was earnest and dedicated, much like yourself. He woke before dawn to meditate, studied the teachings with intense focus, and approached every aspect of practice with unwavering commitment. His intentions were pure and his efforts were genuine. Yet, he struggled constantly with frustration, especially towards those who did not match his level of dedication. The second monk," Buddha continued, "was naturally calm and patient. He understood something profound about the nature of practice that his companion had not yet grasped. One evening, a storm swept through the grove. The wind howled through the trees, and the bamboo stalks creaked and swayed violently. The rustling of the leaves created a constant symphony of sound, making traditional meditation nearly impossible. For the first monk, this was the last straw. He had already had a difficult day, and now nature itself seemed to conspire against his peace. He sat in his meditation posture, but instead of finding stillness, he was overwhelmed by agitation. Every rustle of the bamboo felt like an assault on his practice. Every creak of the bamboo seemed to mock his efforts to find inner quiet. His jaw clenched, his shoulders tensed, and his mind filled with frustration. Finally, he could bear it no longer. "This is impossible," he cried. "How can anyone meditate with all this noise? The wind is too strong, and the bamboo is too loud. I cannot practice here anymore. I need to find a quieter place." And with that, he stormed off to find a peaceful spot away from the noise. Buddha paused, letting the young monk reflect on the story. After a moment, he continued. Now, the second monk, who had watched his companion's struggle, remained seated throughout the storm. He did not try to fight the wind or the noise. Instead, he sat quietly, allowing the sounds of nature to be part of his practice. The wind did not disturb him, nor did the rustling bamboo. He was at peace with the world around him, accepting everything as it was. After a while, the first monk returned, exhausted and frustrated from his search for quiet. He looked at the second monk, who was still sitting serenely, and asked, "How could you meditate in such conditions? How do you find peace when everything around you is so chaotic?" The second monk smiled gently and replied, "The storm is not the problem. The problem is the way I relate to the storm. When I stop resisting the noise and simply accept it, it no longer disturbs me. In fact, it becomes part of my practice. Peace is not found in the absence of noise, but in the ability to be at peace despite it." Buddha looked at the young monk and said, "You, like the first monk, are seeking peace in a world that will never be completely still. You expect everything around you to conform to your ideal. But true peace comes from accepting things as they are, without judgment or resistance. Your frustration with the monks is not about them. It is about your own inability to accept the present moment as it is." The young monk listened closely, his heart beginning to soften. Buddha continued, "This is the nature of practice. It is not about controlling the world around you, but about transforming your relationship to it. When you stop expecting perfection from others and instead focus on cultivating your own peace, you will find the serenity you seek." In that moment, the young monk realized the truth of Buddha's words. His frustration was not caused by others, but by his own expectations and judgments. He understood that true peace could only come from within, and that he had to learn to accept the imperfections of both the world and the people around him. As he sat quietly beneath the Bodhi tree, the storm continued to rage, but he felt no disturbance. The wind, the rustling bamboo, and the noise of the world were no longer obstacles to his peace. They were simply part of the experience. He was at peace with the storm. Buddha looked at the young monk with kindness and said, "This is your practice, learning to be at peace in the midst of the storms of life. Remember, it is not the circumstances that disturb us, but our resistance to them. When we let go of our expectations and judgments, we find the tranquility that has always been available to us." With these words, the young monk bowed deeply, his heart filled with gratitude and understanding. He had been shown the path to inner peace, not through the absence of challenges, but through the acceptance of life as it is. The story of the two monks offers a profound lesson for all of us. In a world full of noise, distractions, and difficulties, we often search for peace in the wrong places. We believe that peace can only be found in ideal conditions, when everything around us is calm and quiet. But the true path to peace is not about finding the perfect external circumstances. It is about learning to accept the present moment, with all its imperfections, and finding peace within ourselves despite the chaos around us. So, as you go through your day, remember the story of the two monks. When you encounter frustration or irritation, pause for a moment and ask yourself, what am I resisting? Can you accept the situation as it is, without judgment or expectation? Can you find peace within, no matter what is happening around you? True peace is not something we have to chase. It is something we already possess deep within us. It is only when we stop searching for it outside of ourselves and begin to cultivate it within that we can truly experience the serenity we seek. The patient monk, who had been sitting in perfect stillness throughout the storm, opened his eyes slowly. His face showed no trace of the agitation that consumed his friend. Instead, there was a gentle smile playing at the corners of his mouth, the expression of someone who had just discovered something beautiful. When he spoke, his voice was as calm as still water. "My friend," he said softly, "I hear the same wind you hear, the same rustling bamboo, but I have learned something important. We do not control the wind. We can't command the bamboo to be silent. What we can't control is our response to what we cannot change." The sound becomes a disturbance only when I decide to let it disturb me. "Listen more carefully," he continued, his words flowing like honey. "The bamboo does not fight the wind. It bends and sways, dancing with the storm rather than resisting it. In its flexibility, it finds strength. In its acceptance of the wind's power, it discovers grace. The same wind that agitates you has become music to me, because I have learned to move with it rather than against it. Patience is not about waiting for perfect conditions or hoping that other people will change to meet our expectations. True patience is the art of finding peace within chaos, stillness within movement, calm within the storm. When we cultivate this inner flexibility, we become like the bamboo, able to bend without breaking, to remain rooted while adapting to whatever conditions arise. This is what transforms ordinary moments into opportunities for profound wisdom. Buddha paused in his storytelling, allowing the young monk to absorb these insights. The night air was filled with its own gentle sounds, crickets singing, leaves whispering, the distant flow of a stream. These sounds, which might have once seemed like distractions, now felt like part of a larger symphony of existence. Modern neuroscience reveals something fascinating about patience. When we resist what is happening, our stress hormones spike, and our prefrontal cortex, the brain's wisdom center, goes offline. But when we practice acceptance, our nervous system naturally calms, and we access higher levels of creativity and insight. The bamboo teaches us what researchers now call cognitive flexibility, the ability to adapt our thinking when circumstances change. Right now, as you listen to these words, notice any sounds around you. Perhaps there is traffic outside, someone moving in another room, or the hum of electronics. Instead of trying to block these sounds out, can you welcome them as part of this moment? Feel how this simple shift from resistance to acceptance changes your entire experience. Here's your bamboo practice for the coming week. Each time you feel irritated by someone's behavior, whether it is a slow driver, a chatty coworker, or a family member who does not do things your way, pause and ask yourself, how can I bend like bamboo in this moment, take 3 conscious breaths and imagine yourself swaying with the wind of circumstances rather than fighting against it. Notice how this mental shift transforms both your stress level and your relationships. The young monk felt something profound shift within his heart. It was as if a tight knot of frustration had suddenly loosened, allowing space for something gentler to emerge. He realized that his agitation with others had been a reflection of his own inner rigidity, his unwillingness to accept the natural diversity of human temperaments. In demanding that others conform to his expectations, he had created his own suffering. From that night forward, the young monk approached his practice with completely different energy. When a fellow monk moved slowly, he saw an opportunity to practice patience. When someone chanted off key, he heard a chance to find harmony within discord. When others seemed less dedicated, he discovered that true dedication meant accepting people exactly as they were while continuing his own sincere practice. He had learned to bend like bamboo, finding strength in flexibility and peace in acceptance. This ancient wisdom speaks powerfully to our hyper-connected world. We are constantly surrounded by people who do not share our values, work at our pace, or see things our way. Social media amplifies every difference of opinion. Traffic tests our patience daily, and even our loved ones can trigger our need for control. But what if, like the bamboo, we could learn to bend rather than break? True patience is not passive resignation or weak acceptance of harmful behavior. It is the courageous choice to remain centered and peaceful while responding wisely to whatever life presents. It is understanding that our inner state does not have to be dictated by external circumstances. When we cultivate this bamboo-like flexibility, we discover that patience itself becomes a source of strength, allowing us to navigate life's storms with grace and wisdom. Tonight, as you rest in the gentle rhythm of your breath, consider where in your life you might be fighting against winds you cannot control. What would it feel like to bend instead of breaking, to flow instead of resisting, perhaps, like the bamboo in the grove? You too can find your own way of dancing with life's inevitable challenges, discovering that true strength often lies not in rigid resistance, but in graceful adaptability, the search that led nowhere. In the misty mountains, where ancient pines whispered secrets to the morning fog, there lived a young monk whose heart ached with a longing he could not quite name. For 3 years, he had devoted himself completely to meditation, study, and spiritual practice. Yet, despite his unwavering dedication, he felt as though he were chasing shadows. Each day seemed to take him further from the enlightenment he sought so desperately. This was not a casual spiritual seeker. This young monk had sacrificed everything for his spiritual quest, leaving behind comfort, family, and career to pursue the deepest truths of existence. His commitment was absolute, his effort genuine. Yet he found himself trapped in a cycle of striving that generated more frustration than peace. The harder he tried, the more elusive his goal became. One crisp autumn morning, when his frustration had reached a breaking point, the young monk approached his master with trembling hands. "Master," he began, his words tumbling out in anguish, "I have been practicing for years with complete dedication. I meditate for hours, study every teaching, follow every instruction, yet I feel further from enlightenment now than when I first arrived. What am I doing wrong?" The master looked up from his gardening, his weathered face showing gentle warmth. He gestured for the young monk to sit beside him on a weathered stone bench. "Let me tell you a story about a farmer who loved his ox more than anything else in the world. This farmer lived in a small village, where his ox was not just a working animal but his closest companion. Together they had plowed countless fields and weathered many storms. The ox was strong and gentle, with wise eyes that seemed to understand the farmer's heart. In the evenings, the farmer would sit beside his faithful friend, feeling a peace that transcended words. One morning, the farmer woke to discover that his beloved ox had wandered away during the night, his heart filled with panic and grief. For without his ox he felt incomplete, as though a part of his very soul had disappeared. He could not imagine life without his faithful companion. Immediately, the farmer began searching with desperate intensity. He called the ox's name until his voice grew hoarse, combed through nearby fields until his feet were bleeding. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Yet still, he searched with unwavering determination. His fields went unplanted, his house fell into disrepair, but nothing mattered except finding what he had lost. One day, after months of fruitless searching, the exhausted farmer discovered fresh tracks at the edge of a dense forest. His heart leaped with joy. Finally, a real clue. These were not just any tracks. They had the familiar gait he knew so well. With trembling excitement, he began following the trail deeper into the forest. The journey was arduous. The tracks led him through thick underbrush, across rushing streams and up steep mountainsides. Sometimes the trail was clear, other times it disappeared, forcing him to search carefully among rocks and fallen leaves. Yet he persevered, driven by the certainty that each step brought him closer to his lost companion. Finally, after following the trail for many days, the farmer emerged into a beautiful mountain meadow. There, grazing peacefully in the afternoon sunlight, was his ox. The animal looked up at his approach, and in its gentle eyes the farmer saw the same wisdom and affection that had always been there. It was as if no time had passed at all. But as he drew closer, something profound began to dawn on him. The ox looked exactly the same as always, strong, gentle, peaceful. It had not been lost or suffering during their separation. In fact, it seemed to radiate the same quiet contentment it had always possessed. The farmer realized that his beloved companion had never really been lost at all. As this understanding settled into his heart, an even deeper realization emerged. The desperate, frantic energy that had driven his search slowly dissolved, replaced by a profound sense of coming home. He sat down in the meadow beside his ox, feeling a peace deeper than any he had known before. It was not just that he had found his lost companion, he had rediscovered something within himself that had never actually been missing. The master paused, allowing the young monk to absorb the meaning of the story. Modern psychology calls this the hedonic treadmill, the tendency we have to believe happiness lies in the next achievement, relationship, or experience. We exhaust ourselves chasing external goals, not realizing that contentment is always available in the present moment. The young monk listened intently, feeling the weight of the lesson settle in his heart. For all his striving, he had been caught on his own treadmill of wanting, believing that the elusive thing that would bring him peace was always just out of reach. It was not his practice, his dedication, or his pursuit of enlightenment that was flawed. It was his belief that something external had to change before he could find peace. The master continued, "You have been seeking enlightenment in the same way the farmer sought his ox. The ox was always right there, just as the peace you seek is within you. It was not lost. It has not changed. You only needed to stop running after it, to stop fighting against your inner unrest. Let go of the idea that peace is something you need to chase. It is already here, waiting for you to recognize it. Just like the farmer, you have been searching outside yourself for something that has always been inside." The young monk sat in silence, a deep stillness settling over him. It was as though the weight of years of striving had been lifted in an instant. In that moment, he realized that peace did not lie in future accomplishments or in getting everything right. It was not something he had to earn. It was something he already possessed, buried under layers of striving and expectations. As he sat beside his master, the young monk felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. He had been given the most valuable lesson of all, not through any complex teaching or grand revelation, but through the simple realization that what he sought was already within him. He could stop chasing it, stop trying to attain it, and instead, simply allow it to be. This is a truth that applies to all of us. We often believe that happiness, peace, or fulfillment lies just beyond our reach, always in the next achievement or experience. But like the farmer with his ox, we find that once we stop searching and start being present with what is, the peace we seek reveals itself quietly and profoundly. True wisdom lies in recognizing that we do not have to fight or chase after peace. It is already here, in the present moment. It is found in our willingness to stop striving, to let go of attachment, and to simply be. The struggle we face is often not in the external world, but in our own hearts, where we cling to the idea that peace must come from somewhere else. The young monk had discovered the most profound truth. Enlightenment is not something to be attained or earned. It is something we awaken to within ourselves, something that has always been there, waiting for us to realize it. And as he sat there, beside his master, in the stillness of the moment, he understood that his search was over. Not because he had found something new, but because he had discovered that everything he needed was already within him. Neuroscientists have discovered that our brains are naturally wired for seeking, but true fulfillment comes from learning to rest in being. This ox represents your true nature, your inherent peace, wisdom, and completeness. The Master continued softly. At the beginning of your spiritual journey, you felt like something precious was missing. So you began searching with great intensity, following every teaching and practice, but what if nothing was ever actually missing? Right now, take a moment to notice your breathing. You are not making it happen. It is simply occurring naturally. This is what your essential peace is like. Always present, always available, requiring no effort to maintain. The searching mind believes it must achieve something, but awareness itself is already complete. Here's your ox practice for this week. Each morning before you begin any spiritual practice or self-improvement activity, spend 60 seconds simply being present. Do not try to achieve anything or become anyone different. Just rest in the awareness that is reading these words right now. Notice how this simple recognition of what is already here changes your entire approach to the day. The young monk sat in stunned silence as these words penetrated years of spiritual striving. For the first time, he questioned not just his methods, but his fundamental assumption that enlightenment was something he needed to acquire. What if peace was not a destination to reach, but his natural state? When he stopped fighting against himself, from that day forward, the young monk's practice transformed completely. Instead of trying to achieve some future state, he learned to rest in the awareness that was already present. His meditations became less effortful and more natural, like settling into a familiar embrace. The desperate seeking had been replaced by grateful recognition. This ancient wisdom challenges our achievement-oriented culture. We are conditioned to believe that happiness requires constant improvement, that peace is something we must earn through effort and discipline. But what if the contentment we seek is as natural and available as our own breathing? What if the spiritual path is not about becoming someone better, but about recognizing the completeness that was never actually lost? Tonight, as you listen to these words, consider that you do not need to become someone different to find peace. You do not need to perfect yourself or achieve some special state. Perhaps the contentment you seek is already here, as natural as your own heartbeat. Like the ox in the meadow, your essential peace has been waiting patiently for you to stop searching long enough to recognize what was never actually lost. The mirror that showed everything. A young monk wandered through life, carrying an invisible burden that grew heavier with each passing day. His mind had become a battleground, where anger, jealousy, and pride waged constant war against his desire for inner peace. No matter how many hours he spent in meditation or how fervently he prayed, these unwelcome emotions kept arising like weeds in a carefully tended garden. He felt like a failure, convinced that true monks should be pure and calm, untouched by such disturbing feelings. One morning, when his frustration had reached its peak, this troubled seeker approached the Buddha with desperation in his voice. "Master," he confessed, his words heavy with shame, "I find myself constantly distracted by anger, jealousy, and pride. No matter how hard I try to be pure and calm, these emotions keep arising. Why can't I escape from these feelings that seem to poison everything I touch?" The Buddha listened with the complete attention that only true compassion can provide. Without saying a word, he gestured for the monk to follow him. They walked together through ancient forests, where sunlight filtered through emerald leaves, creating patterns of light and shadow that danced with each gentle breeze. The silence between them was not uncomfortable, but filled with the promise of understanding. Eventually, they reached a crystal-clear mountain pool where the water was so still it looked like polished glass. The Buddha instructed the troubled monk to sit by the water's edge, his voice gentle but purposeful. "Look into the water," the Buddha said simply. "Tell me what you see." The monk leaned over the pristine surface and immediately saw his own reflection staring back at him. Every detail was perfectly clear: his worried expression, the tension in his shoulders, even the doubt that clouded his eyes. "I see myself." "Master," he replied, though he wondered what significance this simple observation could possibly hold. "Good," the Buddha said with a knowing smile. "Now reach into the water and stir it with your hand. Move it vigorously as if you are trying to chase away what you see there." The monk did as instructed, plunging his hand into the cool water and swirling it with increasing intensity. The previously mirror-like surface erupted into chaos. Ripples spread in every direction. The water became cloudy with disturbed sediment, and his reflection completely disappeared. Where once there had been clarity, now there was only turbulent confusion. The harder he stirred, the more distorted everything became. "What do you see now?" the Buddha asked, his voice carrying a depth of understanding that seemed to penetrate the monk's very soul. "I see nothing clearly," the monk replied, frustrated by the obvious futility of his efforts. "My reflection is gone because the water is too disturbed. Everything is cloudy and chaotic. The more I try to change what I see, the worse it becomes." The Buddha nodded with gentle approval. "Now remove your hand and simply wait." He instructed, "Do nothing but observe what happens naturally." The monk withdrew his hand and sat in stillness, watching the water with growing fascination. Gradually, almost imperceptibly at first, the violent ripples began to subside. The cloudy sediment slowly settled to the bottom, and the chaotic movement transformed into gentle, ever smaller circles. As minutes passed in peaceful silence, the water returned to its original mirror-like state, reflecting his face once again with perfect clarity. But something had changed in those moments of watching. The reflection that now appeared seemed somehow different, not in its physical features, but in its quality. The worry lines had softened, the tension had eased, and there was a new depth of understanding in the eyes that looked back at him. It was as if the simple act of patient waiting had revealed something that had been there all along. Modern neuroscience reveals something remarkable about emotional regulation. When we fight against difficult emotions, our amygdala, the brain's alarm system, becomes hyperactive, flooding our system with stress chemicals. But when we practice what researchers call mindful observation, our prefrontal cortex naturally calms the emotional storm. It is like allowing muddy water to settle. The clarity was always there, hidden beneath the turbulence. The mind is exactly like this pool of water, the Buddha explained with infinite gentleness. When it is calm and still, it reflects reality with perfect clarity. You can see yourself and your circumstances as they truly are without distortion or confusion. But when it becomes disturbed by emotions like anger, jealousy, or pride, it becomes cloudy and chaotic, making it impossible to see anything clearly. Right now, as you listen to these words, notice what emotions might be present in your awareness. Perhaps there is frustration about something that happened today, worry about tomorrow, or judgment about yourself. Instead of trying to push these feelings away, can you simply observe them like ripples on the surface of a pond? Notice how this gentle attention, without trying to fix or change anything, naturally allows the turbulence to begin settling. Here's your mirror practice for this week. When you notice strong emotions arising, anger at a difficult person, jealousy over someone's success, or pride about your achievements, imagine you are looking into that mountain pool. Ask yourself, am I stirring the water right now? Or am I allowing it to settle? Then take 3 slow breaths, giving the emotion space to exist without resistance. Watch how this simple shift from fighting to observing transforms your entire emotional experience. True wisdom comes from learning a different approach entirely. The Buddha continued, instead of fighting against your emotions, observe them with patience and compassion. Watch them arise without judgment, exist without resistance, and pass away without attachment. Like ripples in water, all emotions are temporary by nature. They will settle naturally if you simply allow them the space to do so. The young monk felt a profound shift occurring within his understanding. For years, he had been at war with his own mind, trying to force away any emotion that did not match his ideal of spiritual purity. But now, he began to see that this very struggle had been the source of his suffering. His emotions were not enemies to be defeated, but natural phenomena to be understood and accepted. From that day forward, the young monk's entire approach to his inner life transformed. When anger arose, instead of fighting it, he would observe it with curious attention. When jealousy appeared, he would watch it with patient compassion. When pride surfaced, he would notice it without judgment. And gradually, he discovered that these emotions, when met with awareness rather than resistance, would naturally subside like ripples returning to stillness. This ancient wisdom speaks directly to our emotionally turbulent modern world. In a time where emotions are often seen as burdens or obstacles, we tend to push them away, judge them, or try to control them. But the Buddha's teaching reminds us that emotions are not the enemy. They are part of our natural human experience, arising in response to the world around us. When we meet them with resistance, we only fuel their power. When we meet them with acceptance and awareness, we allow them to come and go without causing harm. In our modern culture, we are constantly bombarded with stimuli that can stir up emotions. The pressures of work, relationships, societal expectations, all these external forces often provoke anger, anxiety, or frustration. We live in a world that demands constant attention and reaction. But the practice of mindful observation, just like looking into the still mountain pool, allows us to detach from these emotions without rejecting them. We simply observe them with awareness, without judgment or attachment. This is not passive resignation. It is an active choice to stop struggling against the natural flow of emotions. When we resist, we build walls around ourselves, creating more stress and suffering. But when we allow the emotions to pass through us without resistance, they lose their power to dominate our lives. In this way, we create space for clarity, peace, and deeper understanding. The young monk had learned this lesson, and he began to apply it to every aspect of his life. When frustration arose during meditation, he observed it without reacting. When anger bubbled up during interactions with his fellow monks, he did not lash out. Instead, he watched it, understanding that it was just a passing storm in his mind. When jealousy appeared, he allowed it to come and go, recognizing it for what it was, a fleeting emotion that did not define him. In the same way, when we face challenging situations in our lives, we can apply this same practice. The next time you feel angry or upset, instead of immediately reacting or suppressing the emotion, simply pause and observe. Ask yourself, what is this emotion trying to tell me? Where is it coming from? And most importantly, can I just be with it for a moment without trying to change it? This practice does not mean we ignore our emotions or suppress them. It means we create the space to be present with them, to understand them, and to allow them to pass naturally. Emotions, like ripples on the water, come and go. When we stop fighting them, we allow them to settle on their own, revealing the clarity beneath. This simple practice of mindful observation can be life-changing. It allows us to break free from the cycle of emotional reactivity and control. It teaches us to embrace our emotions as part of our human experience, without allowing them to take control of our lives. Just as the water in the pool returned to stillness when the monk stopped stirring it, our minds return to clarity when we stop stirring our emotions with resistance. In this modern world, where we are often taught to avoid discomfort at all costs, this practice of acceptance can be revolutionary. We are conditioned to seek happiness through external achievements, material possessions, and the approval of others. But true peace comes not from what we achieve or accumulate, but from learning to be at peace with ourselves, just as we are. The Buddhist teachings remind us that we are not defined by our emotions, nor are we defined by our external circumstances. We are defined by how we respond to those emotions and circumstances. When we meet them with awareness and compassion, we transform them, and in doing so, we transform ourselves. The young monk, having learned this profound lesson, walked forward with a new sense of freedom. He no longer saw his emotions as obstacles to his practice. He understood that they were simply signals, offering him an opportunity to practice patience, awareness, and compassion. And in doing so, he found a peace that went beyond anything he had ever imagined. Tonight, as you rest in the gentle rhythm of your breath, take a moment to reflect on the wisdom of the Buddha's teachings. In what areas of your life are you struggling with emotions? Are there moments when you resist your feelings, trying to push them away or control them? How might it feel to simply observe those emotions, allowing them to exist without judgment or resistance? Consider, too, how this practice of mindful observation can transform your relationships. In moments of conflict, instead of reacting in anger or frustration, can you pause and observe your emotions? Can you allow them to settle before responding? By doing so, you create space for wisdom, clarity, and compassion to guide your actions. As you continue your spiritual journey, remember that true peace does not come from achieving some ideal or reaching a distant goal. It comes from resting in the awareness that is always with you, from embracing the present moment with full acceptance. The wisdom of the Buddha teaches us that peace is not something we find by looking outside ourselves, but something we recognize within. So, as you move through your days, remember the image of the calm, clear water. Let it serve as a reminder that your mind, too, has the capacity for clarity. With patience, with awareness, and with compassion, you can find the peace that has always been there, waiting for you to recognize it. This practice of mindful observation, of allowing emotions to settle, is not just a technique, it is a way of being. It is a way of seeing the world and ourselves with clarity, without the distortion of judgment or fear. When we meet each moment with openness and acceptance, we begin to see life as it truly is, beautiful, full of wisdom, and ultimately peaceful. The boy gazed at him for a moment, his innocent face reflecting both confusion and curiosity. "But why are you hurting yourself?" he asked, his voice gentle yet direct. "Should not a monk be peaceful, happy and strong?" The question hung in the air like a delicate bell, resonating deeply within the monk's weary heart. For the first time in years, the monk found himself at a loss for words. His intense fasting had been a badge of honor, a symbol of his dedication to the path of enlightenment. But now, in the presence of this child, the true nature of his suffering became undeniable. The boy's simple words broke through the monk's hardened resolve, and he realized that in his attempt to purify himself, he had inadvertently starved his soul. His body, weakened by deprivation, had become a vessel of suffering rather than a tool for spiritual growth. In denying his physical needs, he had disconnected himself from the very life force that allowed him to serve others and cultivate compassion. The monk sat in silence, the weight of the boy's question settling heavily on his chest. He had believed that the path to enlightenment lay in denial, in asceticism, in pushing his body to the brink. But the boy's words had opened his eyes to a deeper truth, that true peace and enlightenment cannot be found through punishment or self-neglect. The body, like the mind, requires care, nourishment, and balance. Modern psychology and neuroscience reveal a similar truth. The extreme denial of physical needs, whether through fasting, excessive work, or self-punishment, does not lead to spiritual growth. On the contrary, it can lead to burnout, anxiety, and disconnection from one's true self. The body and mind are intimately connected, and neglecting one harms the other. True well-being arises from a holistic approach that nurtures both the physical and the spiritual. The monk, moved by this realization, looked at the boy with new understanding. "You are right," he said softly. "I have been harming myself in my pursuit of enlightenment. I have forgotten that true peace comes not from denying life, but from embracing it in its fullness. Thank you for showing me the way." The boy smiled, his eyes wide with innocence, unaware of the profound impact his words had had on the monk. With a gentle bow, he continued on his way, leaving the monk to reflect on the lesson he had learned. That evening, as the monk sat down to his meditation, he felt a deep sense of peace that he had not experienced in years. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to enjoy a small meal, savoring each bite with gratitude and mindfulness. He realized that the body's needs were not obstacles to spiritual practice, but integral to it. By honoring the body, he could deepen his spiritual connection and cultivate a more balanced, compassionate life. This story speaks to the dangers of asceticism taken to extremes, a theme that resonates deeply in our modern culture, where self-denial and discipline are often seen as the path to success and happiness. We are conditioned to push ourselves to the limit, to sacrifice our well-being in the name of achievement. But the wisdom of the Buddha teaches us that true fulfillment does not come from denying the body's needs or pushing beyond our limits. It comes from balance, honoring both our physical and spiritual needs with mindfulness and care. In our pursuit of success, we often forget the importance of rest, nourishment, and self-compassion. We push ourselves relentlessly, believing that we must sacrifice our happiness for the sake of our goals. But what if, instead of striving harder, we learned to listen to our bodies, to nourish ourselves, and to embrace rest without guilt? What if we recognized that true strength comes not from pushing ourselves to the brink, but from knowing when to stop, to restore, and to replenish? Tonight, as you rest, consider the balance between your physical and spiritual needs. Are there areas of your life where you are overexerting yourself, neglecting your body or mind in the name of success or discipline? How might you bring more balance into your life, allowing yourself to rest and replenish without feeling guilty or unproductive? Perhaps, like the monk, you will discover that true spiritual growth arises not from self-denial, but from self-care. When we honor our bodies and our minds, we create the conditions for deeper peace, joy, and wisdom to arise naturally. This ancient teaching reminds us that the path to enlightenment is not about sacrificing ourselves, but about embracing all of life with mindfulness and balance. In our modern world, where the pressures of success, achievement, and constant striving often overwhelm us, this wisdom is more relevant than ever. We are taught to push ourselves beyond our limits, to sacrifice our well-being for the sake of external goals. But true fulfillment lies in recognizing that we are already whole, that peace and happiness come not from achieving more, but from living with mindfulness, balance, and self-compassion. As you reflect on this teaching, ask yourself, in what areas of my life do I need to bring more balance? Where am I neglecting my physical or emotional needs in the pursuit of success or external validation? How can I begin to honor both my body and spirit, nurturing both with the same care and compassion? As you reflect on these questions, consider how much of your energy is directed toward achieving external goals that may not necessarily align with your true nature. In our modern world, where distractions are endless and the pressure to succeed is constant, it is easy to forget that we are not human doings but human beings. The pursuit of achievement is a part of life, but it should never overshadow the importance of simply being present, of experiencing the fullness of each moment without the need for constant striving. The monk's realization about the balance between self-discipline and self-care is a crucial one. In the same way, we can become so caught up in external expectations, whether they are work-related, social, or personal, that we forget the importance of nurturing our inner peace. The modern world's emphasis on doing, achieving, and producing can leave us feeling drained, disconnected, and emotionally exhausted. We push ourselves to the point of burnout, convinced that we must sacrifice our well-being in order to succeed. Yet, this path ultimately leads to a cycle of frustration. The more we push ourselves, the further we feel from true contentment. The paradox is that by learning to rest, to honor our physical and emotional needs, we create the conditions for real progress. It is only in stillness and reflection that we can cultivate clarity, creativity, and deep wisdom. When we push forward relentlessly, we risk missing the deeper truths that arise only when we stop, look within, and listen to our bodies and hearts. One of the most profound aspects of this teaching is the reminder that we are always whole. The monk, after years of fasting and self-punishment, came to understand that he did not need to purify himself through suffering. Instead, true purification and spiritual growth arise when we acknowledge our inherent worth and treat ourselves with kindness and respect. The more we embrace our true nature without the need to earn it or prove it, the more we can experience the peace and joy that come with self-acceptance. This lesson is especially important in a world that constantly demands more from us, whether it is in our careers, relationships, or social media presence. We are often told that we are not enough as we are. The pressure to keep up with others, to achieve more, to constantly improve, can make us feel inadequate and disconnected from our true selves. But the wisdom of the Buddha teaches us that peace is not found through external accomplishments, but through the simple act of being, of accepting ourselves as we are, without judgment or shame. Take a moment now to reflect on the ways in which you might be pushing yourself too hard, striving for external validation, or neglecting your own needs. Are there areas in your life where you could benefit from more balance and rest? What would it feel like to give yourself permission to slow down, to rest, and to simply be present with yourself? This ancient wisdom challenges the modern belief that success requires constant action, effort, and sacrifice. It encourages us to shift our focus from doing to being, from achieving to experiencing. In doing so, we begin to rediscover the peace and contentment that already reside within us, waiting to be acknowledged. As you settle into this moment, allow yourself to rest in the stillness. Let go of any expectations or pressures, and simply experience the present moment as it is. Notice your breath, your body, and the thoughts that arise without judgment. Allow yourself to simply be, knowing that this moment is enough. When we practice self-care, we open the door to greater awareness and clarity. This is not a passive act, but a powerful choice to prioritize our well-being and inner peace. By taking care of ourselves, we can approach life with more energy, compassion, and wisdom. We become better equipped to face challenges, cultivate meaningful relationships, and contribute to the world in a way that is aligned with our true nature. It is only when we let go of the need to control everything, to prove our worth, and to chase external achievements that we can fully experience the beauty of life. The more we try to force outcomes, the more we miss the richness of the present moment. The monk's journey from self-punishment to self-compassion is a powerful reminder that true peace is found not in achieving more, but in embracing life as it is. Tonight, as you rest, reflect on the beauty of simply being. Allow yourself to let go of any expectations, desires, or judgments. Embrace the present moment with kindness, knowing that in this stillness, you are enough. The wisdom of the Buddha teaches us that peace is not something to be chased, but something to be recognized within ourselves. When we stop searching for it outside, we begin to experience the peace that has always been there, waiting for us to notice. I have given all that I can, and I know that the greatest act of service I can offer is to demonstrate that the true essence of life lies in selfless love. not in attachment. If my death is what it takes for you to learn this, then I am ready. However, it is not for you to suffer. It is for you to awaken to the true nature of selflessness. The courtiers and the people in the court were stunned, caught in a silence that seemed to stretch beyond time. The king, with his unwavering kindness, had prepared to sacrifice everything. But as the moment lingered, a deeper truth began to unfold. The sage, who had come to test the king's resolve, saw the purity of his heart and understood that his sacrifice was not born of a desire to prove a point or seek recognition. It was the natural expression of his inner wisdom and boundless compassion. Just before the king could proceed with his sacrifice, the sage revealed his true identity. "I am not a beggar," the sage said softly. "I am a teacher, sent to show you that true generosity is not in giving your life, but in living with full awareness and compassion each moment you are alive. Your life is precious, not only because of what you give to others, but also because of what you allow yourself to receive. It is through the balance of giving and receiving that true fulfillment is found." The king, although momentarily shocked, absorbed this wisdom deeply. The sage's words cut through the layers of ego and attachment, revealing the simplicity of true generosity, not in sacrifice or self-neglect, but in living authentically and harmoniously with all beings. "You have already proven your generosity in the way you live," the sage continued. "True generosity does not require the abandonment of your life, but the loving embrace of every moment, just as it is. The way you live your life mindfully, in service, with love. This is the true gift you offer to the world." The king, now deeply moved, understood. The greatest act of generosity was not martyrdom, but the conscious, compassionate presence in each action, each breath, and each interaction. It was about being present, acknowledging the sacredness of life in all its forms, and offering one's true self without expectation. From that day forward, the king lived with even greater humility. He realized that the act of living fully, not in denial or extreme sacrifice, was the path to true enlightenment. He embraced his kingdom and his people, not as a ruler, but as a servant, understanding that both giving and receiving were necessary for balance and growth. Modern research shows that self-compassion is essential for mental and emotional well-being. When we are able to love ourselves fully, including our vulnerabilities and imperfections, we develop a deeper capacity to extend that love to others. The king's story is a vivid reminder that true generosity arises from a place of inner peace and acceptance, not from a desire for recognition or sacrifice for its own sake. The wisdom in this story speaks to our culture of constant striving, where the value of success is often measured by how much one gives up or sacrifices. In the pursuit of success or spiritual achievement, we sometimes forget that we are human, that we need care, love, and rest. It is through the balance of self-care and selflessness that we can lead lives of authenticity, grace, and compassion. As you reflect on your own life, consider how you might approach generosity. Are you giving from a place of inner abundance? Or are you sacrificing parts of yourself in the process? Can you embrace the gifts you give, knowing that it is the act of giving with love that creates connection, rather than the act of self-neglect? Tonight, as you rest, consider the delicate balance between giving and receiving. How can you embrace both with the same level of compassion and mindfulness? What can you offer others that comes from a place of fullness, not depletion, in the same way that the king's true generosity came from his balanced understanding of self and others? So too, can you offer your unique gifts to the world without fear of losing yourself? The path of generosity, like the path of mindfulness, is not about extreme self-denial or indulgence. It is about finding the middle way, the place where both self-care and selflessness coexist harmoniously. In embracing this balance, you will discover a wellspring of peace and joy that can never be depleted, a boundless love that connects you to the deepest truths of existence. This is the true gift that comes not from sacrifice, but from wisdom, the wisdom that shows us how to live fully, authentically, and compassionately in each moment. The more we learn to give without attachment, to love without expectation, and to care for ourselves and others with equal devotion, the more we come to understand the heart of true generosity. Living with grace, balance, and love in every action. The king's transformation spread throughout the kingdom, not as a single dramatic event, but as a quiet ripple, touching each person's life with gentle wisdom. The people, seeing their ruler embrace life with such a profound balance, began to reflect on their own lives. They started to ask themselves, how can I live with this same grace and awareness? How can I find joy in the present, without the need to sacrifice or to overindulge? This lesson was not lost on them. The message of living fully, with both generosity and wisdom, seeped into their daily lives. The poor no longer waited at the gates for the king's offerings, but began sharing with one another, finding satisfaction not just in what they received, but in the joy of giving. The rich, who had once hoarded their wealth out of fear, found peace in sharing, seeing it as a means to enrich their own lives with a deeper sense of connection. Over time, the king's generosity became less about material offerings and more about a way of being a reflection of his heart. He would often walk among the people, not to give them gifts, but simply to listen, to share in their struggles and joys. His presence was enough, a reminder that true wealth lies not in what we possess, but in the love and compassion we offer one another. Modern psychological studies reveal that the act of connecting with others, whether through a simple conversation or a genuine act of kindness, can significantly reduce stress and increase life satisfaction. This is because humans are inherently social creatures, and the bonds we form with others are essential to our well-being. This sense of connection, which the king embodied, is a core principle of emotional intelligence. By being present with others, by offering compassion without expectation, we create a space in which true healing and growth can occur. The king's ability to offer himself, his attention, his time, these became his greatest gifts, and they were freely given. As you reflect on your own life tonight, consider the moments when you have given or received with love. How often do we offer what we have without attaching any strings or expectations? Perhaps it is time to ask, how can I offer my presence to others? How can I be generous with my time, my understanding, my attention, in a way that brings peace to both myself and those around me? The balance between giving and receiving is subtle. Giving from a place of abundance, whether physical, emotional, or spiritual, does not deplete us. It enriches us. It is through sharing that we discover our own capacity for growth and transformation. When we open our hearts to the world opens its heart to us in return. Tonight, as you lie down to rest, consider the ways in which you can bring more generosity into your life, not through grand gestures, but through the simple, quiet acts of presence, compassion, and understanding. When we offer our full attention to another, when we give without the need for recognition, we are giving the greatest gift of all, our true selves. This is the heart of generosity, offering what is most precious to us without expectation, without sacrifice of our own well-being, and without attachment to the outcome. It is not a matter of giving away our possessions, but of offering our presence, our awareness, and our compassion to the world around us. True generosity arises when we stop measuring what we give and simply offer what we have, whether that be time, love, or understanding. It is through this balanced giving that we come to realize that our greatest treasure is not what we keep, but what we share. And in sharing, we find the richness of life itself. If my life were asked for in this moment, and if offering it could serve something greater than myself, then I would give it without hesitation. True love, at times, asks for the most complete form of surrender. As you sit with this thought now, gently turn your attention toward what you cherish most. It may be your name and reputation, the bonds you hold with others, the dreams you have built over years, or simply the quiet sense of safety you rely on each day. What would it be like to hold these precious things with a softer grip, to allow them space rather than clinging to them tightly? This is not an invitation toward carelessness or self-neglect, but an honest reflection on how attachment can quietly narrow the heart. When we wrap our identity too tightly around what we own, who we are, or how we are seen, love often becomes conditional and generosity becomes cautious. Begin by noticing, each day, one small place where you are holding on too firmly. It may be the urge to always be correct, the longing to be acknowledged, or the need for a situation to unfold in a specific way. Gently experiment with loosening your hold, even slightly. Pay attention to what happens inside. You may find that releasing does not empty you, but instead creates space. Space for ease, for warmth, for genuine connection. True generosity does not start with giving objects or time, but with relaxing the desperate belief that happiness must be protected at all costs. As the king stood ready for what he believed would be his final breath, something unexpected unfolded. The beggar before him straightened, casting aside his disguise, revealing the presence of a wise sage. His eyes reflected deep respect and quiet admiration. With a steady voice he spoke, saying that the king's life was never what he sought. He had come only to see whether the generosity offered was sincere or merely a performance meant to preserve image and praise. What you have shown, the sage continued, is among the rarest qualities a human heart can possess, a freedom untouched by selfish grasping. Most people, he observed, give only what they know they can lose without pain. You were willing to offer what could never be replaced. This, he explained, is the quiet line separating simple charity from true compassion. Such willingness reveals a profound understanding. Fulfillment does not come from tightening our hold on life, but from opening our hands fully in service to something beyond ourselves. This ancient story gently unsettles modern ideas about self-care and boundaries, where we are often taught that preservation of the self must come first. And yet, the deepest sense of meaning often arises in moments when attention shifts away from personal gain. The king's readiness to give everything was not rooted in self-destruction. It emerged naturally from a heart that had recognized its inseparable connection to all living beings. When this truth becomes clear that your well-being cannot be isolated from the well-being of others, generosity stops feeling like sacrifice and begins to feel like joy. As this reflection settles in, consider how your own life might change if you lived with greater openness and less attachment. What would shift if you trusted that giving enriches rather than diminishes you. Perhaps fulfillment would no longer feel like something to accumulate or guard, but something that naturally flows when shared. Deep within mist-covered mountains, where ancient peaks rise and fall like slow breaths, a young monk arrived at a monastery carrying a restless fire inside him. His heart pulsed with ambition, his thoughts circled endlessly around awakening, and every part of him strained toward achieving something extraordinary. He had consumed sacred texts, memorized teachings, and approached meditation with relentless intensity. Still, the peace he sought remained just beyond reach. Each morning he stood before his teacher, asking the same question, with barely hidden frustration. "When will I awaken?" he pleaded. "I have devoted myself fully. I follow every instruction, attend every teaching, and sit in meditation for hours. Why does understanding feel so distant?" The old abbot observed him with calm familiarity. He had seen many seekers arrive this way, shaped by a world that promised quick rewards and instant results. Life outside the monastery moved at the speed of convenience, where hunger was answered immediately and problems were expected to vanish with the right solution. Wisdom, however, obeyed a far slower rhythm. One morning, sensing the young monk's tension had reached its peak, the abbot invited him to walk through the forest. They moved in silence until they stood before an immense oak tree, rising like a pillar holding up the sky. Its trunk was vast, its branches wide and sheltering, offering refuge to birds, insects, and wandering animals alike. The tree radiated a quiet steadiness that seemed untouched by time. The abbot rested his hand against the rough bark and asked how long the monk believed it had taken for the tree to grow so strong. The monk studied its height and breadth, guessing that it must have taken many decades, perhaps even longer. The abbot nodded and explained that the tree had been growing for more than 2 centuries, beginning as a fragile acorn scarcely larger than a fingertip. Season after season, it extended its roots deeper into the soil and lifted its branches toward the light. It endured storms that bent its limbs, droughts that slowed its growth, and winters where nothing seemed to change at all. Yet through it all, the tree never hurried. It never strained to grow faster than its nature allowed. It simply remained present, responding to each moment as it came. Its strength, the abbot explained, was born from this steady patience. Even modern science shows that deep and lasting change within the brain takes time. New pathways do not form through force, but through repetition and consistency. When we rush, we interfere with the very process we hope to accelerate. Wisdom grows as rings within a tree, layer upon layer, each experience adding depth. Sitting beneath the oak's wide canopy, the monk listened as the abbot gently explained that awakening cannot be demanded. It unfolds when the right conditions are present: regular practice, patient effort, and acceptance of where one stands now. The more one grasps for quick results, the more the natural process is disturbed. In this moment, notice how you relate to time and progress. Are you pushing yourself forward with urgency, believing speed will bring clarity? Allow your breath to slow. Like the tree, growth continues, even when it is not visible, quietly preparing the ground for what is to come. Like the tree, standing quietly through centuries, you are changing even when there is no immediate sign to point to. Growth does not always announce itself. Often it works silently beneath the surface, strengthening roots before lifting branches into view. Each morning, there is an invitation to practice this kind of presence. Spend a few moments simply being here, without striving, without reaching for accomplishment. Imagine yourself rooted in this moment, nourished by what is already available, open to whatever unfolds in its own time. When impatience appears, as it inevitably will, notice it gently. Remember that the most enduring transformations take place slowly, far below conscious awareness. Trust that steady presence creates fertile ground for wisdom to arise naturally. The tree offers a lesson not in effort, but in patience. As the abbot continued, tracing the deep lines of bark with his fingers, he invited attention to the roots hidden beneath the earth. They did not appear overnight. They extended gradually, finding stability and nourishment in darkness and depth. In the same way, spiritual foundations form quietly. Each day of practice, every small moment of awareness, every act of kindness adds strength to roots you may never fully see. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is too small to matter. Seated beneath the vast canopy, the young monk felt a subtle shift within himself. The tight pressure that had lived in his chest for months began to soften. He recognized his urgency for what it was, an attempt to force life to open according to his schedule. It was like pulling at a bud, hoping to make it bloom faster. Real growth, he understood now, required patience, trust, and respect for natural timing. With a quieter voice, he asked how he would ever know whether progress was happening at all. The abbot smiled, not with answers, but with reassurance. The tree does not measure its growth day by day, yet it continues to grow without interruption. Change in spiritual practice is often invisible in the short term, but unmistakable when seen across longer stretches of time. Rather than fixating on a future state, the abbot encouraged him to inhabit each moment fully. Practice was not a means to an end, but a living expression of presence. Like the tree, joy could be found in the process itself, not in distant milestones. From that day on, something fundamental shifted. The monk continued to meditate and study, but with a different quality of attention. He no longer demanded awakening. Instead, he allowed it. He approached each sitting with the same patience a tree shows as it reaches toward light, steadily and without strain. In releasing urgency, his practice deepened in ways he had not anticipated. Progress, paradoxically, unfolded more naturally once he stopped chasing it. This quiet teaching speaks clearly to a culture driven by achievement. Life today moves at relentless speed. Information arrives instantly. Needs are met quickly, and solutions are expected to be immediate. Yet the most meaningful changes in human experience follow rhythms that cannot be hurried. Relationships, understanding, wisdom, and compassion all mature over time. Intensity alone is not what transforms us. Often, it is consistency paired with patience. When effort is softened by trust, something deeper begins to take root. Just as the tree grows through seasons of abundance and scarcity alike, human development continues through moments of clarity and confusion, ease and difficulty. Returning to the earlier story of the king, there is a quiet thread that connects these teachings. The king's generosity was not born from impulse, nor from a desire to appear noble. It arose from a deep understanding cultivated over time, a recognition that life is not something to be hoarded. His willingness to give everything reflected a heart that had learned, slowly and steadily, to release fear. Both stories point toward the same truth. Whether offering one's life in compassion or offering one's patience to the process of growth, freedom arises through letting go. Attachment tightens the body and narrows the mind. Release creates space. In that space, love moves more freely. As you reflect now, notice where urgency still shapes your actions. Notice where fear of loss quietly influences your choices. These patterns are not mistakes. They are invitations. Each time you see them clearly, you loosen their hold. Each time you choose patience over pressure, generosity over grasping, something within you settles. there is no need to rush toward a better version of yourself. Like the tree, you are already growing, even in moments that feel stagnant. Something unseen is happening. Roots are extending. Strength is forming. Wisdom is layering itself through experience. Allow yourself to rest in this understanding. Let practice be simple. Let presence be enough. Trust that life unfolds with intelligence beyond your efforts to control it. When you stop forcing the path, you may discover that it has been carrying you all along. In this way, generosity and patience meet. One teaches the heart to open outward, the other teaches it to remain steady within. Together, they reveal a life lived not in defense, but in quiet participation with everything that is. As you ease into rest tonight, imagine yourself growing in the same quiet way as that ancient oak. Sense your roots sinking deeper into lived understanding, your branches stretching naturally toward clarity. Trust that every sincere moment of attention adds another subtle layer to your wisdom. Within this gentle acceptance of natural timing, the path itself slowly reveals that it has never been separate from where you are. There was once a merchant whose wealth was so vast, it could have rivaled small kingdoms. His storehouses overflowed with silks brought from distant lands. His vaults shimmered with rare jewels, and his estates extended farther than the eye could see. Servants anticipated his every desire, and influential figures competed for invitations to his extravagant banquets. By every visible measure, his life was complete. Yet beneath this abundance, an unspoken emptiness lived in his chest. Each morning he woke, surrounded by luxury, and felt a dull ache that no treasure could soothe. He walked through halls filled with priceless objects, wandered gardens where rare flowers bloomed in perfect order, and still carried the sense that something essential was missing. Meals prepared by master chefs lost their flavor. Entertainment provided by gifted performers felt strangely hollow. The more he possessed, the more obvious this inner absence became. In time, the merchant heard rumors of a humble monk known for an uncommon depth of understanding. People spoke quietly of this teacher's ability to point others toward genuine peace. With a growing sense of desperation, the merchant decided to seek him out, hoping that spiritual insight might succeed where wealth had failed. He prepared for the journey as he did everything else, with excess, surrounding himself with gifts and supplies. When he finally encountered the monk, the contrast startled him. The teacher sat calmly beneath a simple tree, wearing plain robes, owning little more than a wooden bowl and a few worn texts. Yet something in his presence felt richer than anything the merchant had ever collected. There was an ease, a quiet fullness that all the merchant's riches had never produced. With respectful formality, the merchant bowed and spoke honestly. He described his wealth, his status, his comfort, and then confessed the growing dissatisfaction that followed him everywhere. No acquisition, no achievement, no pleasure had relieved it. The monk listened without interruption, his attention steady and open. When he spoke, his voice was gentle. He told the merchant he could help, but first would grant him 3 wishes, each carrying a lesson about happiness. The merchant felt a spark of excitement. At last, a solution worthy of his problem. Without hesitation, he declared his first wish. He wanted to be free from all worries and troubles. Surely, without these burdens, peace would finally arrive. The monk closed his eyes briefly, then nodded. The wish was granted, he said, and advised the merchant to return home and observe his mind. days passed, and confusion set in. The same worries continued to appear. Concerns about business, relationships, reputation, and health arose just as before. Nothing seemed different. Frustrated, the merchant returned to the monk and complained that the wish had failed. The monk's smile held understanding rather than surprise. Worry, he explained, is not something that can simply be removed. The human mind is designed to anticipate uncertainty and seek safety. These thoughts arise naturally. Peace does not come from erasing worry, but from seeing it clearly and no longer being ruled by it. Anxiety grows from attachment to outcomes beyond our control. Rest comes from accepting uncertainty as part of life and learning to remain steady within it. Still hopeful, the merchant made his second wish. He asked to be free from desire altogether, believing that wanting was the source of his restlessness. Again, the monk granted the wish. Back home, the merchant tried to suppress desire, but quickly discovered its persistence. Hunger brought longing for food. Fatigue brought longing for rest. Ambition brought longing for success. Fighting these impulses only increased his inner tension. Returning once more, he demanded an explanation. The monk responded patiently. Desire, like worry, is woven into human experience. Trying to destroy it by force only creates struggle. Wisdom lies in understanding its fleeting nature and not allowing it to dictate one's identity or happiness. Something began to shift in the merchant. For his final wish, he spoke with less certainty and more humility. He wished to understand himself, to see clearly why he remained restless, despite having everything he believed he wanted. The monk's expression softened with approval. This, he said, was a truly meaningful wish. Through careful guidance and reflection, the merchant began to see the truth. His emptiness did not come from lacking external things, but from misunderstanding his own nature. He had been trying to fill an inner absence with outer objects, like collecting ornate vessels instead of drinking the water that quenches thirst. He was encouraged to notice moments when the familiar sense of lack appeared. Rather than reaching outward, he was invited to pause and ask what he was truly seeking beneath the wanting. Often, the answer was not an object, but a feeling, safety, love, purpose, peace. These were never found in possessions, because they already existed within awareness itself. The merchant's transformation was quiet, but complete. His circumstances remained unchanged, his wealth intact, yet his relationship to it shifted entirely. Contentment revealed itself not as a prize to be won, but as a natural state uncovered when grasping fell away. Returning home, his possessions became useful rather than defining. Food satisfied hunger without promising lasting fulfillment. Success brought enjoyment without demanding more. The emptiness dissolved, not because something was added, but because he recognized the completeness that had always been present. Reflecting on his journey, it becomes clear that the deepest longing is rarely for more experiences. It is for the peace that comes from knowing oneself directly. In a world constantly offering solutions to manufactured needs, this ancient insight points toward a treasure that requires no purchase, the quiet richness of understanding one's own nature. Not long after, another figure wandered through a village, his clothes worn thin, his feet hardened by long roads. He owned nothing beyond a patched garment and a small clay bowl. Villagers often turned away, as though his poverty might spread. Yet he was about to encounter a lesson that would reshape his understanding of wealth entirely. Word had spread that a great teacher was speaking nearby. Drawn by something he could not name, the beggar joined the gathering, lingering at the edge, unsure of his place among the crowds. When the teaching ended, he surprised himself by stepping forward. With a trembling voice, he spoke of his poverty and suffering, asking for anything that might ease his burden and bring some peace. The teacher looked at him with eyes that saw beyond appearances and asked a simple, unexpected question. "What do you already possess?" The beggar answered honestly that he had nothing at all. He believed himself completely empty-handed. The teacher listened without correcting him, allowing the words to settle in the open space between them. Then, with a calm presence that carried neither pity nor judgment, he invited the man to look more closely. "You say you own nothing," he said, "yet you stand here alive. You have breath moving through your body, eyes that can see, ears that can hear, and a mind capable of understanding these words. You carry a bowl that receives food, hands that can accept it, and legs that have brought you here. Are these truly nothing?" The beggar stood in silence, unsettled by the question. He had never considered these things as possessions. They had always felt temporary, fragile, easily taken away. The teacher continued, gently pointing not to what could be lost, but to what was already present. "You also have the capacity to feel gratitude, to learn, to notice kindness when it appears. These are not small things. Many who own great wealth are blind to them." The man felt something soften inside him. For the first time, his poverty did not feel like an absolute absence, but like a narrow way of seeing. He had been measuring himself against others, against what he lacked, without recognizing what quietly supported him every day. The teacher spoke again, explaining that suffering often arises not from having little, but from believing we are incomplete. When we define ourselves by comparison, by loss, or by imagined deficiency, even abundance feels empty. As the beggar listened, a realization unfolded. His life had been difficult, yes, but within it had always been moments of simple richness. A cool drink of water after walking all day, a smile from a stranger, the warmth of sunlight on his skin in the early morning. These moments had never erased his hardship, yet they had carried a quiet sufficiency he had overlooked. The teacher did not offer money, nor did he promise a change in circumstance. Instead, he pointed toward a shift in understanding. "Wealth," he explained, "is not measured by accumulation, but by the absence of inner resistance to what is. A person who needs little and appreciates much carries a kind of abundance that cannot be stolen. One who constantly longs for more, no matter how much they possess, lives in poverty of the heart." The beggar felt tears rise, not from despair, but from recognition. He saw that his suffering had been compounded by the belief that happiness was always somewhere else, owned by someone else. In that moment, standing before the teacher, he sensed a quiet dignity returning to his life. Nothing outward had changed, yet the weight he carried felt lighter. As he left the gathering, the dusty road was the same, his bowl still empty, his clothes still worn, but his steps felt different. He noticed the sound of birds in the trees, the rhythm of his breath, the simple fact that he was moving forward. What he owned had not increased, yet what he felt within had expanded. This story reflects a subtle truth that often goes unnoticed. We spend much of our lives chasing what we believe will complete us, assuming fulfillment arrives through addition. Yet again and again, wisdom points in the opposite direction. Peace emerges not when we finally have enough, but when we recognize that we are already enough without constant grasping. In another place and time, a teacher once said that craving is endless, but contentment has a stopping point. When desire governs the mind, even pleasure turns into restlessness. When understanding grows, even simplicity becomes rich. The beggar's lesson was not about denying hardship, but about no longer allowing hardship to define his worth or limit his sense of wholeness. Consider how often you measure your life by what is missing: time, recognition, security, certainty. Each comparison quietly reinforces the belief that fulfillment lies just beyond reach. Yet when attention turns toward what is already present, breath, awareness, the ability to feel and respond, something shifts. Life begins to feel less like a problem to solve and more like an experience to inhabit. True wealth does not eliminate struggle, but it changes our relationship to it. It allows us to move through difficulty without collapsing into the story that we are broken or lacking. It reminds us that even in moments of uncertainty, something steady remains. The beggar carried this understanding with him as he continued his journey. He still asked for food when hungry, still rested when tired, still felt pain when rejected. But beneath these experiences, a quiet knowing had taken root. He was not defined by what he owned or lacked. He was defined by his capacity to be present to receive life as it unfolded. This same capacity lives within everyone. It does not depend on status, comfort, or success. It reveals itself when the constant search for more pauses long enough for us to notice what has never been absent. In recognizing this, the beggar discovered that he had never truly been poor at all. And so the teachings continue, not as instructions carved into stone, but as gentle reminders woven into ordinary moments. They appear when we question our assumptions, when we listen deeply, when we allow understanding to replace habit. Whether through the patience of a tree, the generosity of a king, the humility of a merchant, or the awakening of a beggar, the message remains the same. What we seek is rarely found by reaching farther. It is uncovered by seeing more clearly, when grasping loosens, when comparison softens. When presence replaces pursuit, life reveals a quiet completeness that was never missing. In this recognition, effort relaxes, striving eases, and the ordinary becomes quietly sacred. If you allow this understanding to settle, even briefly, you may notice a subtle change. Not in circumstances, but in how you meet them. In that meeting, without adding anything at all, you may glimpse the wealth that cannot be lost. He raised his worn palms as if their rough skin alone could prove how little he owned. The gesture carried years of quiet resignation. Yet the teacher did not stop there. With a calm voice, free of pressure, he asked another question. "Do you still have your eyes?" The man hesitated, surprised by the simplicity of it. Then answered, "That, of course he did." The teacher nodded slightly and invited him to consider something more deeply. If someone were to place a chest overflowing with gold before you and ask for your sight in return, would you accept the trade? The beggar recoiled instinctively. The idea itself felt wrong. Without his eyes, he said, he would lose the colors of dawn, the expressions of gentle faces, the ability to move safely through the world. No amount of wealth could replace that. For the first time since he had begun speaking, his words carried strength rather than despair. The teacher noticed the shift and continued, guiding the inquiry without haste. "What about your hands?" he asked next. "Would you surrender them for a vast palace, filled with servants and endless comfort?" The beggar shook his head without hesitation. His hands allowed him to touch the world, to work when work was possible, to offer kindness through the simplest gestures. They were how he felt, connected to life itself. No palace could compensate for their loss. Something subtle began to change within him, though he could not yet describe it. The teacher's questions were not accusations, nor riddles meant to trap him. They were invitations to look again. "And your legs," the teacher continued. "Would you give up the ability to walk in exchange for a kingdom to rule?" The beggar laughed softly, the sound unexpected even to himself. What meaning would a kingdom have, he asked, if he could not walk through it, could not feel the ground beneath his feet, could not experience the simple rhythm of movement? As he spoke, his voice grew steadier. These legs had carried him across long distances, through hardship and moments of grace alike. They had brought him to this very place. No crown could outweigh their value. The teacher listened, eyes warm, as understanding slowly took shape in the space between them. Long after this moment, modern thinkers would give names to what was happening in the beggar's mind. They would speak of how people naturally overlook what is familiar while believing that happiness waits just beyond the next acquisition. The human tendency to adapt quickly to gains makes extraordinary gifts feel ordinary, almost invisible. But here, without theories or data, the beggar was touching that truth directly. The teacher spoke again, gently reflecting what had been revealed. "You began by saying you owned nothing," he said. "Yet in a few moments you have named treasures more valuable than all the wealth, locked away in royal vaults. Your eyes cannot be replaced. Your hands cannot be bought. Your legs are beyond price. How, then, can you call yourself poor?" The beggar stood quietly, the weight of these words settling into him. For his entire life he had measured himself by absence. Empty pockets had defined his sense of worth. He had been so focused on what he lacked that he had never truly noticed the fullness of his own being. The realization felt both humbling and freeing. The teacher was not finished. "And what of your mind?" he asked. "Your ability to think, to remember, to learn, to feel compassion and wonder. Could any material treasure equal the awareness that allows you to understand these very questions?" The beggar felt as though a door had opened inside him. He had never considered consciousness itself as a form of wealth. The teacher invited him into a simple moment of recognition. "Place a hand on your chest," he said, "and feel the steady rhythm there. This heart has worked without rest since before you formed your first memory. Take a slow breath and notice how your lungs respond without instruction. Look around and see how effortlessly your eyes shape the world into color and form. You carry within you systems more intricate than any device humans have ever built." True poverty, the teacher explained, is not defined by the absence of possessions. It is the inability to recognize the abundance already present. When a person learns to value these inherent gifts, they discover a kind of wealth that cannot be taken away, no matter how circumstances change. This understanding does not magically alter external conditions, but it transforms how one lives within them. Tears traced quiet paths down the beggar's weathered face. They were not born of sadness, but of gratitude, so deep it felt unfamiliar. He understood then that he had been living like someone desperate for water while standing in the middle of a flowing river. Everything he needed to recognize his own worth had always been there. From that moment forward, his days unfolded differently. The challenges remained. He still needed food. He still searched for shelter. Yet he moved through the world with an inner steadiness he had never known. Each morning began with appreciation for the simple fact of being alive. When he ate plain food, he tasted it with reverence, aware of nourishment as a quiet miracle. Those who encountered him began to notice the change. There was a dignity in his posture, a calmness in his presence that did not depend on comfort or status. Some even found themselves drawn to his peace, wondering how a man with so little could seem so complete. He had uncovered a truth that escapes many who live surrounded by luxury. Satisfaction does not come from accumulation. It arises from seeing clearly what has never been missing. This invitation extends beyond his story. Each person carries gifts that have become easy to ignore simply because they are always there. Breath, awareness, movement, the ability to feel and understand. Perhaps the first step toward abundance is not seeking more, but pausing long enough to recognize what is already sustaining you in this very moment. In another time, a ruler sought clarity of a different kind. Surrounded by scholars who argued endlessly about the nature of truth, he grew weary of their certainty and contradiction. Determined to see for himself, he devised an experiment. He summoned 6 men who had been blind since birth, men whose other senses had grown sharp through necessity. Before his court, he announced that they would together discover the true nature of an elephant. The men were led to a great animal, standing calmly in the courtyard. Each was guided to a different place and instructed to explore what stood before him. One felt a vast, solid surface, and declared with confidence that an elephant was like a wall, immense and unyielding. Another grasped a smooth, pointed tusk and insisted it was a spear, a weapon made for strength and force. A third encountered the trunk, flexible and powerful, and proclaimed it to be a great serpent. A fourth wrapped his arms around a thick leg and described a living pillar, like a tree rooted firmly in the earth. Near the ear, another felt a broad, moving surface and argued that an elephant was a fan, designed to stir the air. The last man held the tail, thin and rope-like, and laughed at the others, ignorance, certain he alone understood. What began as careful exploration soon turned into argument. Each man clung to his own experience as the whole truth. Voices rose. Tempers sharpened. The elephant remained still, untouched by their certainty. Unaware of it, they were revealing a pattern that modern science would later describe. The mind's habit of mistaking partial perception for complete understanding. The men were not foolish, nor were they dishonest. They were limited by perspective, convinced that what they touched was all there was to know. The king watched as the argument reached its height. Then he raised his hand, and silence slowly returned. "My friends," he said calmly, "each of you has touched only a part of the elephant. Each of you speaks from sincere experience," the king said, "yet none of you has encountered the whole. What you touched was real, but incomplete. An elephant is not a wall, nor a spear, nor a snake, nor a tree, nor a fan, nor a rope, yet it includes aspects of all these things. Your conflict arises not because any of you are wrong, but because each of you believes your fragment is the totality." The words settled over the courtyard like dust after a sudden wind. The men grew quiet, sensing something larger than their disagreement. The king continued, explaining that truth often appears divided when perception is narrow, when understanding is limited to a single angle. Certainty becomes rigid. Wisdom, he suggested, begins when one recognizes the limits of one's own view. The elephant had not changed during their argument, only their relationship to it had shifted. In their insistence, they had turned partial insight into opposition. Each had defended his experience as though it were threatened by the existence of another. Yet the animal stood whole, untouched by their conclusions. This story echoes through countless aspects of human life. People encounter fragments of reality shaped by upbringing, culture, memory, and emotion. From these fragments, they build entire worlds of meaning. Disagreements arise not because truth is absent, but because it is larger than any single perspective can contain. Modern studies of the mind reflect this ancient observation. The brain constructs experience by filtering vast amounts of information, selecting what aligns with existing patterns. What does not fit is often dismissed without awareness. This process allows us to function efficiently, yet it also narrows vision. Certainty feels safe, even when it is incomplete. The blind men were not lacking intelligence, they were lacking context. Without sight, each relied fully on touch, and touch revealed only what was immediately accessible. In the same way, people rely on their most familiar ways of knowing, rarely questioning what remains unseen. The king's lesson was not meant to humiliate, but to soften. When one understands that personal experience is partial, curiosity replaces defensiveness. Listening becomes possible. Truth expands not through argument, but through integration. This insight connects quietly to the earlier teaching of the beggar. Just as the beggar had overlooked his own abundance by focusing on absence, the blind man overlooked the fullness of reality by clinging to isolated impressions. In both cases, suffering arose not from lack, but from misperception. Awareness changes everything. When the beggar recognized the wealth already present in his body and mind, his life transformed without altering its external shape. When the blind men were invited to see beyond their certainty, the argument dissolved into understanding. Nothing new was added. Something false was released. These stories do not ask for belief. They invite observation. Notice how often certainty hardens around limited information. Notice how quickly the mind defends its version of events, even when challenged gently. This habit is deeply human. Yet there is another possibility. One can hold experience lightly, recognizing it as a piece rather than the whole. This does not weaken understanding. It strengthens it. Openness allows learning. Humility allows connection. When perspectives meet without the need to dominate, a more complete picture begins to form. No single person sees the entire elephant, yet together, fragments can align. Truth becomes less about winning and more about seeing. In daily life, this practice appears in simple ways. Listening without planning a response. Pausing before judging. Allowing another's experience to exist alongside your own without feeling threatened. These small acts create space. The king did not demand that the men abandon what they had felt. He asked them to place it within a larger context. This distinction matters. Wisdom does not erase experience, it situates it. Likewise, gratitude does not deny hardship. The beggar still faced difficulty. The blind men still could not see. Yet something essential shifted. Their relationship to reality softened. Resistance gave way to understanding. Both teachings point toward the same quiet truth. Life is richer than our assumptions about it. Suffering often grows not from circumstance alone, but from the stories we tell ourselves about what is missing or what must be defended. When attention turns inward with honesty, abundance reveals itself. When attention turns outward with humility, complexity becomes less threatening. In this way, inner wealth and shared truth arise from the same source. Clear seeing. There is no requirement to resolve every question or hold a perfect view. The invitation is simpler. Recognize what is present. Acknowledge what is partial. Remain open to what lies beyond immediate perception. Breath continues without effort. Awareness remains available. Others carry experiences different from your own. These facts alone are enough to soften the grip of certainty and lack. The elephant remains whole, whether or not it is understood. The body remains miraculous, whether or not it is appreciated. Reality does not depend on recognition to exist, yet recognition changes how one lives within it. This understanding does not arrive all at once. It unfolds gradually, through moments of noticing and release. Each time you loosen attachment to being right, space opens. Each time you acknowledge what is already sustaining you, peace deepens. There is nothing to add to life, to make it complete. There is something to notice. What you touch is real. What you see is meaningful. What you do not yet perceive still belongs to the whole. In this quiet balance, between knowing and not knowing, between having and seeking, a different way of being emerges, not driven by lack, not confined by certainty, simply present, attentive, and open to what is. Each of them had touched something genuine, yet none had encountered the whole. The creature contained every quality they described and far more beyond their reach. Silence settled among the six as awareness dawned. Each had mistaken a fragment for completeness, assuming that personal contact equaled total understanding. None had paused to imagine that another hand, placed elsewhere, might reveal a different but equally true aspect of the same being. Their dispute had not grown from deception, but from the narrowness of partial knowing. This becomes a useful reflection. Think of a recent moment of disagreement. Instead of tightening around the belief that you are right and the other mistaken, consider what portion of the greater whole the other person may have encountered. Their view might be limited, yet still rooted in something real. Truth often exceeds the borders of any single perspective, and wisdom lies in sensing that excess without needing to dominate it. When this story was later shared as teaching, it was offered as a mirror for how people meet life itself. Experience is filtered through memory, culture, fear, and hope. Each viewpoint reveals something authentic, yet remains incomplete by nature. Understanding deepens not when one view conquers others, but when the limits of personal seeing are acknowledged with humility. The elephant stands as a symbol for existence in its vastness. Whether the subject is meaning, conflict, belief, or daily interaction, people often cling to their small section of contact and defend it as if the whole depends on it. In doing so, they miss the larger shape forming quietly beyond their grasp. Openness allows that shape to emerge. In a world shaped by constant reinforcement of familiar opinions, this teaching becomes especially relevant. When only confirming voices are heard, certainty hardens and curiosity fades. Fragmented experiences turn into rigid identities. Progress stalls not from lack of intelligence, but from lack of willingness to see beyond what feels known. The story does not suggest abandoning discernment. It invites softness. Holding views lightly creates room for learning. Differences stop appearing as threats and begin to resemble doorways. What once felt like opposition can become contribution. From this understanding, another story unfolds, quieter in setting yet equally revealing. At the edge of a small village lived a poor weaver who owned almost nothing. His home was a simple hut, his tools few, his income barely enough to sustain him. All he possessed in terms of clothing was a single robe, worn thin by time and use, passed down through generations until its original color had faded into anonymity. When word spread that a great teacher would visit the village, excitement grew. Wealthy households prepared offerings of silk, jewels, and gold. Even those of modest means gathered what they could to present something worthy. Watching these preparations, the weaver felt a deep ache, not for himself, but for the longing to give. His poverty had never felt so sharp as in this moment of devotion. As the day approached, he searched his hut for something suitable: a cracked pot, a rough mat, a few simple tools. Nothing seemed appropriate. Then his gaze rested on the robe, hanging quietly by the door. The thought felt almost absurd. How could such a thing be offered alongside treasures meant to impress? Yet beneath the doubt, another knowing stirred. A gift's value did not rest in price, but in sincerity. If this robe was all he had, then offering it meant offering everything. When the gathering began, the village filled with reverent stillness. One by one, people stepped forward with their gifts. Each was received with the same calm attention. The weaver remained at the back, clutching the folded robe, his resolve wavering. Fear of ridicule crept in. Shame whispered. Then his eyes met the teacher's gaze across the crowd. There was no judgment there, only recognition. Something steadied within him. He stepped forward, each movement dissolving hesitation into quiet strength. Reaching the teacher, he held out the robe with both hands. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Here stood a man offering his only possession, leaving himself with nothing. His voice, though soft, carried clarity. He spoke of having no wealth to give. Only this garment, offered fully and without reserve. The response surprised everyone. The teacher rose and accepted the robe with deep reverence, as if receiving something sacred. The fabric was held gently, not inspected for quality, but acknowledged for meaning. Then, to the astonishment of all present, the teacher placed the worn robe over his own. In that moment, something shifted in the space. The crowd saw generosity differently. Not as surplus shared, but as self-offered. The value of giving revealed itself not through abundance, but through sacrifice. It was explained that many give from what remains after comfort is secured. This gift was different. It was complete. To give everything is to release attachment entirely, and such an act carries a weight no gold can match. What appeared as poverty was revealed as richness of spirit. Those watching felt their assumptions loosen. The robe had not changed, yet its meaning had transformed everything around it. The weaver returned home, later clothed in borrowed garments, yet carrying a joy he had never known. His hands were empty, yet his heart felt full. In giving all, he had discovered an inner abundance, untouched by loss. This story traveled far, not because of its drama, but because of its truth. It reminded listeners that generosity is not measured by quantity, but by presence, by how much of oneself is included in the act. From here, another image arises, set in nature's quiet rhythm. In a clear river flowing through deep forest, a golden fish lived freely within the currents that had shaped its life. The water moved without hurry, carrying the fish through light and shadow. Nourishment and rest. This river was not confinement, but belonging. One day, a fisherman noticed the fish's beauty and cast a net. The fish struggled briefly, then grew still. Lifted from the water, it felt the absence immediately. Breath became effort. The world, once fluid, turned harsh and dry. In that instant, a choice appeared. The fisherman admired his catch, already imagining reward. Yet as he looked closer, he saw the fish's stillness, its fading vitality. Something in him hesitated. The fish, sensing this pause, gathered what strength remained and leapt from the net, slipping back into the river. Freedom returned in a rush of water and breath. The fish disappeared into the depths, choosing life over capture, movement over possession. What might have been claimed was released. The river flowed on, unchanged. Yet in that simple moment, a truth revealed itself. Some things cannot be owned without being destroyed. Freedom, like generosity and understanding, exists fully only when not confined. These stories point in the same direction. Wealth, truth, and fulfillment are not objects to grasp, but relationships to recognize. When grasping loosens, what remains is enough. The river closed around the fish as if nothing had happened, its surface smoothing itself without effort. Beneath the flowing water, life resumed its quiet rhythm. The fish felt strength return with every movement, gills opening easily again, body carried rather than resisted. What had seemed like escape was simply a return to what had always sustained it. On the riverbank, the fisherman stood still, his empty net hanging loosely from his hands. For a moment, disappointment flickered through him. The fish had been rare, beautiful, valuable. Yet alongside that loss came an unexpected softness. He had witnessed something more valuable than possession. He had seen what happens when life is allowed to choose itself. That night, as the fisherman lay down to rest, the image of the golden body slipping back into water stayed with him. He realized how often he had mistaken holding for having capture for success. In releasing the fish, he had not lost something meaningful. Instead, he had loosened a habit that had quietly constrained him for years. Freedom, he sensed, was not the opposite of limitation. It was the absence of unnecessary grasping. In many lives, the same moment appears again and again, though it wears different forms. A relationship held too tightly begins to suffocate. A goal pursued with desperation loses its joy. An identity defended at all costs becomes a cage. The river teaches without words. It carries what belongs to it and releases what does not. The fish did not struggle against the net endlessly. It waited for the opening that appeared naturally. In this, there is a subtle lesson. Not all freedom comes from force. Sometimes it arrives through stillness, through recognizing the precise moment when letting go aligns with life itself. Consider how often effort is applied where attention would suffice, how often tension replaces trust. The river never chases its destination, yet it arrives. It does not argue with rocks or cling to its banks. It flows, adjusting without complaint, shaping and being shaped in the same movement. Those who watched the river daily noticed nothing unusual, yet something had shifted beneath the surface, invisible but real. The fisherman began casting his net less often. When he did, he chose with care. Not every opportunity needed to be taken. Not every gain needed to be claimed. In time, the story of the fish spread quietly, not as legend, but as reflection. People spoke of it not to admire the fish or criticize the fisherman, but to question their own habits of holding. What was being gripped out of fear rather than love? What was being pursued long after it had ceased to nourish? Freedom reveals itself not as an achievement, but as a recognition. It is noticed in the moment. One stops insisting that life conform to expectation. It is felt when the hands unclench and discover they are still full. In another place, far from the river, a woman sat alone at night, troubled by restlessness she could not name. Her life appeared complete by ordinary standards. Yet something felt tight, as if her days were wrapped too carefully, leaving no room for breath. She remembered hearing a story once, about a fish and a river, about release without regret. She began to notice how often her thoughts returned to control, planning, predicting, rehearsing outcomes that had not yet arrived. Each attempt to secure happiness seemed only to move it further away. So she experimented with a small shift. When anxiety rose, she softened instead of resisting. When uncertainty appeared, she stayed present rather than fleeing into explanation. At first, this felt like doing nothing. Yet within that apparent stillness, space opened. The pressure in her chest eased. Life did not become perfect, but it became honest. Moments regained their texture. Ordinary experiences felt less like steps toward something else, and more like places to stand. This is how freedom often works, quietly, without announcement. It does not demand belief, only willingness. The willingness to stop forcing the current and allow oneself to be carried, even briefly, across traditions and cultures. The same understanding emerges in different forms. The deepest peace does not come from accumulation, certainty, or victory. It arises from alignment with what is already moving, from learning when to act and when to release. The fish did not gain anything new by returning to the river. It simply reclaimed what had always been true. The river had never abandoned it. Only separation had created suffering. In daily life, separation often appears as the belief that fulfillment exists elsewhere. In the next achievement, the next possession, the next version of oneself. Yet again and again, wisdom points back to presence, to the simplicity of being where one is, without demanding that the moment justify itself. As you move toward rest tonight, allow this understanding to settle gently. There is nothing you need to seize, nothing you need to escape. Like the river, life is already moving. Like the fish, you are already part of it. Notice where effort can soften into trust, where holding can become openness, where the fear of loss can transform into appreciation for what remains when nothing is grasped. Freedom is not something granted by circumstances. It is revealed when resistance ends. In that quiet release, the current carries you exactly where you need to be. Its body glimmered beneath the surface like light scattered across water, each movement smooth and effortless, as though the river itself were breathing through it. Every creature along the banks recognized this fish, not only for its beauty, but for the calm that seemed to surround it. Yet that same radiance had drawn eyes filled with desire. And desire has a way of turning admiration into confinement. On a morning, veiled in pale mist, a fisherman arrived quietly at the river's edge. His journey had been long, fueled by stories that promised a single catch capable of altering his fate. He did not come in desperation, but in calculation. Such a creature, he believed, was meant to be claimed. He waited with practiced stillness, letting patience do the work that force could not. When the net finally tightened, his pulse surged. As he drew it in, the river reflected gold back at the sky. The fish lay within the woven threads, more magnificent than legend had suggested. Wealth, security, recognition, each seemed suddenly within reach. Yet before triumph could settle, a voice arose, clear and unafraid, carrying a depth the fisherman had never heard. It asked not for mercy, but for reflection. It spoke of freedom, not as an abstraction, but as a living necessity. The fisherman listened despite himself, curiosity interrupting habit. The idea that compassion could outweigh certainty unsettled him. He had learned to trust what could be measured, held, exchanged. Feelings had never fed him. As he hesitated, footsteps sounded nearby. A small group emerged from the forest path, and among them walked a figure, whose presence altered the air itself. There was no urgency in his movement, no judgment in his gaze. He observed without interference, understanding that the moment was already teaching what words might only echo. The choice was named gently, not as right or wrong, but as becoming, possession or permission, holding beauty or allowing it to continue. The fisherman felt the tension between fear and something quieter, something unfamiliar. For the first time, he saw the fish not as opportunity, but as life mirroring his own wish to remain unburdened. The release was slow, intentional. When the net opened and the water reclaimed what belonged to it, the fisherman felt no emptiness. Instead, something expanded. A tightness he had carried for years dissolved without explanation. The river flowed on, unchanged, yet he knew he was not the same. That sense stayed with him long after the moment passed. It did not fade like excitement or dull like profit. It deepened. He spoke of it rarely, but when he did, his voice carried certainty without insistence. Freedom, he had learned, multiplies when shared. Far from the river, in a forest thick with shadow, another life moved in the opposite direction. Where compassion had opened one heart, cruelty had sealed another. The man known as Angulimala lived as a warning, whispered in fear. His name no longer belonged to him alone. It had become a symbol of terror shaped by blood and memory. Once, he had been different. Gentle, curious, eager to learn. Betrayal had twisted that nature slowly, replacing trust with suspicion, purpose with rage. What began as confusion hardened into identity. Violence was no longer an action, but a definition. He no longer remembered who he had been before the forest claimed him. That morning, he waited as he always did, driven by habit more than desire. The final act felt inevitable, stripped of meaning. Then he saw the monk, unarmed, unhurried, moving as though the forest posed no threat. This absence of fear struck Angulimala harder than resistance ever had. He shouted warnings shaped by reputation, yet the monk continued forward untouched by them. Angulimala ran, weapons raised, but distance refused to close. Breath burned. Confusion replaced fury. The world no longer behaved as expected. When he finally stopped, exhausted and shaken, his demand was no longer a threat, but a plea. The monk turned. His face held no fear, no challenge, only clarity. "I have already stopped," the monk said calmly. "It is you who have not." The words landed without force, yet they struck deeper than any blade. Angulimala felt something fracture within him. All his movement, all his violence, had been an attempt to outrun something he had never faced, himself. In that stillness, the monk spoke not of punishment, but of ending. Ending the chase, ending the identity built on harm. The possibility felt unbearable, then strangely relieving. Tears rose where rage had lived. The necklace at his throat grew heavy for the first time. Transformation did not erase the past, it recontextualized it. The man laid down his weapons not as surrender, but as recognition. What he sought through destruction could never be found there. The forest did not change, he did. Both stories point toward the same truth from different directions. Freedom appears when grasping ends, whether through generosity, release, or the courage to stop running. Life opens when resistance softens. There is no need to become someone else, only to cease being what fear has shaped. In that quiet turning, even the darkest path reveals an opening, and what seemed irreversibly lost begins, slowly, to return. The monk stood unmoving, his presence steady as the forest itself. Angulimala stared at him, bewildered by the calm that refused to retreat. Never before had anyone faced him without fear, and this absence of resistance unsettled. Something buried deep beneath years of violence. The monk's eyes held neither condemnation nor pity, only an unwavering awareness that seemed to pierce through the layers of anger and despair. "I have stopped," the monk repeated softly, "but you continue to run." Those words echoed inside Angulimala with unbearable clarity. For the first time, he noticed how exhausted he truly was. Not only his body, but his mind, endlessly fleeing memories, guilt, and a self he no longer recognized. His weapons felt heavier than ever, not with threat, but with the weight of everything they represented. He shouted again, though his voice trembled now, demanding to know how the monk could claim to have stopped while still walking. The answer came gently, without urgency. The monk explained that true stopping had nothing to do with the body. It was the end of hatred, the end of chasing illusions, the end of becoming enslaved by the past. The monk spoke of stillness not as passivity, but as freedom from compulsion. Something within Angulimala cracked open. The fury that had driven him for so long faltered, replaced by confusion and grief. Memories surfaced unbidden. Of his childhood name, of kindness once received and once given. He dropped his weapons as if they no longer belonged to him. The sound of metal striking earth felt like a final punctuation to a story he no longer wished to continue. He fell to his knees, overwhelmed by the recognition of what he had become. Words spilled out, broken and raw, confessing violence, remorse, and despair. He did not ask for forgiveness. He did not believe he deserved it. He only asked how someone so lost could ever find another path. The monk listened without interruption. When he finally spoke, his voice carried neither shock nor revulsion. He spoke of cause and condition, of how suffering perpetuates suffering until awareness intervenes. He spoke of responsibility without eternal condemnation, of transformation that begins not by denying the past, but by refusing to repeat it. Angulimala felt something unfamiliar stir within him. Not hope exactly, but the possibility of not being trapped forever by who he had been. He rose slowly, as if learning how to stand in the world again. The forest seemed different, not less dark, but less hostile. He followed the monk, leaving behind the identity that had consumed him. Life after that moment was not easy. The consequences of his actions did not vanish. Villagers feared him. Stones were thrown. Insults followed. His body bore wounds, not from battle, but from the weight of atonement. Yet he did not turn back. Each breath became an act of stopping, each step a refusal to return to violence. The pain he endured became part of the purification, not as punishment, but as acceptance. In time, the fire that once fueled destruction transformed into discipline. Where rage had lived, restraint grew. Where fear had ruled, awareness took root. He learned to sit with discomfort without acting upon it, to witness thoughts without obeying them. The forest that once echoed with terror now witnessed silence. This transformation did not erase his past. It redefined his future. Those who had known his former name struggled to reconcile it with the man before them. Yet change, when genuine, carries a quiet authority that explanation cannot replicate. His presence became a living teaching, proof that no identity is fixed beyond repair. Consider what this story reflects back to you. Not extremes of violence, But the subtler ways we cling to harmful patterns because they feel familiar. The roles we continue to play long after they cease to serve life. The anger we justify, the guilt we rehearse, the stories we refuse to release. Stopping does not mean denying these patterns, but seeing them clearly enough to step out of their momentum. Transformation begins not when circumstances change, but when perception shifts. When we recognize that the path we are on is being walked unconsciously. Awareness interrupts repetition. Compassion redirects energy. Responsibility grounds freedom. The forest where Angulimala once hunted did not disappear. Neither do our internal forests of fear and habit. But when walking slows, when the chase ends, even the darkest terrain reveals space to breathe. Light does not rush in. It waits for stillness. In this stillness, identity loosens. We are no longer confined to what we have done or what has been done to us. Life becomes a series of present choices rather than a sentence dictated by the past. This is not redemption granted from outside, but release cultivated from within. Across these stories, a pattern quietly unfolds. A king willing to give everything discovers freedom from attachment. A monk teaches time through the patience of a tree. A merchant learns that understanding outweighs possession. A beggar recognizes abundance already held. Blind men argue until perspective widens. A weaver offers all and reveals the meaning of generosity. A fisherman releases beauty and gains peace. A criminal stops running and finds light. None of these transformations arrive through accumulation. Each begins with relinquishment, not loss, but the end of grasping. Not weakness, but alignment with something deeper than fear. As you rest with these reflections, notice where effort softens into presence, where control loosens into trust, where identity relaxes enough for awareness to speak. Growth does not announce itself. Like rings inside a tree, it forms quietly, invisibly, shaping strength over time. Nothing more is required than honesty with this moment. Nothing less than the courage to stop running from it. It was the Buddha himself, his presence carrying a depth of compassion, so palpable it seemed to soften the very air of the forest. When he spoke, there was no force in his voice, only a quiet clarity that reached even into Angulimala's hardened chest. "I have already stopped," he said gently. "It is you who are still running." The words struck Angulimala with sudden intensity, not as an accusation, but as a mirror held directly before him. In Buddhist understanding, this moment reveals the truth that awakening is never absent, even in those who appear most lost. Though Angulimala's body had halted, his mind was still in motion, fleeing from pain, fleeing from remorse, fleeing from the possibility of peace. The Buddha pointed not to the movement of feet, but to the restless momentum of the heart. Angulimala felt his grip loosen without conscious intent. His weapons lowered as confusion gave way to curiosity, something he had not felt in years. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice stripped of threat. The Buddha's gaze was steady, filled with patience beyond measure. "I no longer run from suffering," he replied. "I no longer hide from truth or escape the present moment. You are still running from your own conscience, still racing away from redemption. Your body may be still, but your heart has not yet learned to rest." This teaching reflects a central insight of Zen, the difference between outer calm and inner stillness. Many appear composed while their minds churn endlessly. True stopping is not a posture, but a release of the inner struggle that fuels suffering. The Buddha had come to this complete stopping, while Angulimala remained trapped in craving, hatred, and fear. Something within Angulimala cracked open. For the first time since violence had consumed his identity, he saw himself clearly. The necklace of severed fingers pressed heavily against his chest. No longer a symbol of power, but a crushing weight. The blades in his hands felt alien, as though they belonged to a stranger. Warm tears rose unbidden. The first he had allowed himself in years. "Is it truly possible," he whispered, his voice breaking, "for someone like me to stop running? Is there any hope left for one who has caused so much harm?" The Buddha answered without hesitation, embodying the heart of compassion. "Every being holds Buddha nature," he said softly, "no matter how deeply buried beneath anger, fear, or delusion. It cannot be destroyed. What you call evil is confusion about who you truly are. When confusion dissolves, the light that was always present reveals itself again." This teaching reflects the understanding that no one is inherently evil. Harmful actions arise from ignorance of our shared nature. When beings truly see that harming another is inseparable from harming oneself, violence loses its grip. Transformation is not the creation of something new, but the remembering of what was never absent. Angulimala's change did not come from becoming someone else, but from recognizing who he had always been beneath the layers of darkness. He fell to his knees, his body shaking, and removed the terrible necklace from his neck. His weapons fell to the forest floor. With humility and desperation, he asked to follow the path of awakening. Seeing the sincerity of his heart, the Buddha received him without judgment. From that day forward, the one once feared, as the terror of the forest, walked a different path, guided by discipline, remorse, and deep commitment. His story endures as a reminder that no one lies beyond redemption. In our own lives, we may encounter those seemingly consumed by anger or destructive patterns, yet wisdom asks us to look beyond appearances to the unbroken nature within. Buddhist insight invites us to see past behavior and into essence. Often, the most profound transformations emerge from the most unlikely places. There once lived a potter whose hands had shaped clay for more than 40 years, crafting vessels so refined that travelers crossed great distances to acquire them. His workshop overflowed with bowls glazed in colors that captured light like rainbows held still, vases that seemed to cradle moonlight, cups so delicate they made even plain water feel precious. Despite his mastery and acclaim, the potter felt a quiet restlessness. With the Buddha soon to visit his village, he longed to offer a gift that would express his deepest devotion. He worked with relentless focus, selecting the finest clays, blending rare glazes, firing piece after piece in his kiln. Each creation surpassed the last in beauty, yet none eased the tension in his heart. He shaped bowls, etched with elaborate symbols of awakening, vessels opening like lotus blossoms, cups as fragile as crystal. As the day approached, frustration grew heavier. Though flawless in technique, something essential was missing. The pieces were exquisite, yet hollow in feeling, as though straining to impress rather than resting in their own truth. In his effort to create the perfect offering, he had drifted away from the simple joy that once guided his hands. On the morning of the visit, the potter sat among countless rejected works. Clay stained his fingers, fatigue shadowed his eyes, and disappointment weighed heavily on him. In exhaustion and surrender, he took an unremarkable lump of clay and began to shape it without plan or ambition. His hands moved quietly, guided not by intention, but by attentiveness. He allowed the clay to become what it wished. From this ease emerged the simplest bowl he had ever made. Undecorated, unadorned, unremarkable at first glance. It was round, functional, honest. As he held it, he felt something unfamiliar during all his weeks of striving. The bowl carried a quiet dignity, absent from his ornate creations. When the Buddha arrived, villagers gathered with offerings of silk, gems, manuscripts, and finely crafted works. The potter approached slowly. His plain bowl, feeling almost out of place among such grandeur, with humility he extended it. He spoke of his efforts, his frustration, and how only when he stopped striving did this bowl appear. The Buddha accepted it, with the same reverence shown to every offering, then lifted it for all to see. The crowd grew silent. "Do you see its true nature?" he asked. Many were puzzled. Compared to the lavish gifts around it, the bowl seemed nearly invisible. The Buddha spoke again, explaining that its value lay not in what it held, but in its ability to hold. A bowl's usefulness comes from its emptiness, from the space that allows it to serve. Emptiness, he explained, is not nothingness, but freedom from fixed identity. Just as the bowl's openness allows it to receive water or rice, our openness allows compassion and wisdom to arise. The potter's simple bowl had become a teaching without words. The Buddha traced the rim gently, pointing out that the bowl did not compete with its contents. Filled with water, it did not overshadow the water. Holding rice, it did not seek attention. Its purpose was fulfilled through humility. The crowd began to recognize the reflection of their own striving. So often they sought recognition, importance, affirmation. The teaching pointed toward another way, one where fulfillment arose not from asserting the self, but from serving without self-importance. Like the bowl, true richness came from emptiness rather than accumulation. The potter listened as though each word was shaping him, as surely as his hands had shaped clay. Something settled inside his chest, not excitement, not pride, but a gentle clarity. He saw how often his striving had narrowed his vision, how the desire to offer something extraordinary had quietly eclipsed the sincerity that once guided his work. In that moment, he understood that the bowl had not come from effort, but from trust. The Buddha lowered the vessel and returned it to him without ceremony. There was no praise, no distinction made between this gift and the others. Yet the potter felt seen in a way he never had before. His shoulders softened. He no longer felt the need to measure himself against anyone else. The bowl was enough, and so was he. From that day forward, his craft changed, not in appearance alone, but in spirit. The vessels he created afterward were neither elaborate nor careless. They were attentive. Each one carried an ease that invited use rather than admiration. People who held his bowls noticed a subtle calm, as if their own hands remembered how to rest. These stories do not teach accumulation, but release. The fisherman released beauty and discovered peace. Angulimala released violence and found stillness. The potter released ambition and uncovered meaning. In each case, transformation did not arrive through struggle, but through letting go. In ordinary life, the same pattern quietly unfolds. We tighten our grip on roles, opinions, possessions, identities, believing they will secure happiness. Yet fulfillment arises when the grip loosens. When space opens within us, listening becomes possible. Compassion has room to breathe. Wisdom arrives without force. An empty bowl is not deficient, it is ready. A quiet mind is not blank, it is receptive. A life no longer crowded with self-importance becomes capable of holding far more than one filled with noise and striving. Angulimala's stopping was not a single moment, but a lifelong practice. Though his hands no longer carried weapons, the weight of his past followed him. Villagers recoiled when they saw him in robes, fear lingering in their eyes. He accepted their distrust without protest, understanding that actions leave echoes. He walked patiently, begging for alms, enduring insults, stones, and silence. Each step became a continuation of stopping. The Buddha reminded him that awakening does not erase consequence, but it transforms relationship. Pain met with resistance deepens. Pain met with awareness dissolves. Angulimala learned to sit with what arose without fleeing. The running mind slowly learned rest. The potter, too, faced moments when old habits returned. Orders came for elaborate commissions. Praise tempted him back toward display. Each time, he returned to the feel of clay between his palms, to the quiet bowl that had taught him more than years of mastery. He learned that simplicity was not limitation, but freedom. The fisherman carried his own memory, one that visited him in quiet evenings by the river. He never regretted the release. When hardship came, he remembered the expansion he had felt when his hands opened. That memory sustained him more than gold ever could. These paths appeared different, yet they turn toward the same truth. Suffering arises from grasping, from misunderstanding who we are. Peace emerges not by becoming more, but by uncovering what has always been present. In moments of anger, notice the running. In moments of fear, feel the tightening. In moments of pride, sense the fullness that leaves no space. Each is an invitation to stop, not to suppress, not to escape, but to rest inside experience as it is. Stopping does not mean passivity. The Buddha walked, taught, responded. The potter worked. Angulimala served. Action continued, but without the inner chase that turns movement into suffering. Emptiness does not mean absence of life. It is what allows life to flow. A bowl filled to the brim cannot receive. A heart crowded with self cannot listen. When space appears, relationship becomes possible. You do not need to destroy what you have been. You do not need to invent a new self. Like Angulimala, recognition is enough, like the potter. Allowing is enough, like the bowl. Openness is enough. As these teachings settle, there is nothing to add, no conclusion to reach, only the quiet presence of what remains when striving softens. Life meets you there, unadorned, sufficient, whole. In that meeting, the running mind slows, the hands loosen, the bowl rests open. And this, without effort, is the beginning of peace. He understood then that his struggle had never been with clay or form, but with himself. During those long weeks of frustration, he had been trying to insert his identity into every vessel, pressing his need to be seen into the surface of his work. Each ornate bowl had carried his ambition, his desire for recognition, his subtle fear of not being enough. The simple bowl had arisen only when he stepped aside, when effort softened into attention. It was beautiful, precisely because it made no attempt to be so. From that moment, his relationship with his craft shifted quietly, but completely. He continued shaping vessels of grace and refinement, yet something essential had changed. The bowls no longer asked to be admired. They rested easily in the hands, fulfilling their purpose without insistence. There was a clarity to them, a selfless simplicity that allowed whatever they held to matter more than the object itself. Like his humble offering, they served without announcing their worth. In learning how to create empty vessels, he discovered how to empty himself of the obstacles that had limited his work for years. The Buddha carried that plain bowl throughout his journeys, using it daily without ceremony to those who noticed it. The bowl spoke without words, reminding them that what is absent often gives rise to the deepest value. The space within mattered more than the shape around it. Often, the most meaningful offerings are not elaborate gestures, but quiet acts shaped by sincerity rather than display. In another place, in a valley rich with flowing streams and endless blossoms, there lived a cobra whose name was spoken with reverence rather than fear. Known throughout the animal world for his wisdom and kindness, he had become a guardian rather than a threat. Creatures sought his counsel, trusting his calm presence and measured insight. Birds lingered near him when uncertain of their path. Small animals brought disputes to his attention, confident in his fairness. Even humans left offerings near his dwelling. Honoring the peace that surrounded him, he had taken vows of non-violence, a commitment he held without exception. Season after season, he lived in harmony beneath a flowering tree, his days marked by stillness and quiet reflection. His gentle movements through the grass inspired ease instead of alarm. Through consistent compassion, he transformed the natural fear associated with his kind into respect. Yet, circumstances shifted when village children wandered into the valley and discovered his home. At first, they watched from a distance, remembering the stories told by their elders. Over time, noticing his refusal to defend himself, curiosity hardened into contempt. What began as playful testing turned into deliberate cruelty. Stones were thrown. His tail was pulled. His meditation was disrupted by laughter and shouting. Each act escalated as the children realized there would be no retaliation. The power they felt emboldened them, and restraint became their invitation to harm. Day after day, the cobra endured. His body bore wounds. His rest was shattered. Still, he clung to his vows, believing that any display of force would betray his path. He waited for their interest to fade, yet more children arrived, drawn by stories of a serpent who would not resist. His sanctuary became a place of suffering, and whispers spread that his wisdom was nothing more than cowardice. When the Buddha passed through the valley, he found the cobra wounded and exhausted beneath the jasmine tree. The brilliance of his scales had dimmed, and his spirit was weighed down by confusion. Sitting beside him, the Buddha listened as the serpent spoke of his commitment to peace and the violence it seemed to invite. Doubt had crept into his heart, eroding his certainty. The Buddha's response was gentle, yet precise. He explained that the serpent had mistaken non-violence for submission. Refusing to harm others did not require allowing oneself to be endlessly harmed. Compassion, when separated from wisdom, can become enabling. True care sometimes demands clear boundaries, not only for one's own sake, but for the growth of others. Nonviolence does not mean passivity. It means responding without hatred, standing firm without seeking revenge. The cobra's silence had removed all consequence from the children's actions, teaching them nothing. When asked how to protect himself without causing harm, the Buddha offered a simple instruction. Strength could be shown without being used. The next day, when the children returned, the cobra rose fully, spreading his hood and releasing a hiss that carried undeniable authority. He did not strike. He did not chase. He simply revealed his capacity. The message was clear. Harm was possible, yet restraint was chosen. The children retreated, shaken by the presence of power, held consciously in check. Peace returned to the valley. Respect replaced cruelty. The cobra resumed his role, now understanding that wisdom sometimes requires appearing fierce in order to remain harmless. Boundaries, when set with compassion, protect everyone involved. Far away, high among snow-crowned peaks, a clear mountain stream flowed with singular devotion. For centuries, it had carved its way through stone. Offering life freely to all it touched, monks traveled long distances to drink from its waters, sensing the purity of its intention. The stream existed to nourish, to give, to sustain, without expectation. Descending into a valley, it encountered a village that flourished along its banks. Gardens bloomed, fields thrived, children laughed beside its current. The stream felt fulfilled, watching its generosity take form in human lives. Over time, however, the villagers began diverting its flow more aggressively, building channels without regard for balance. The water continued to give, unaware that its own integrity was slowly being compromised. As seasons passed, the stream felt itself thinning, its once strong current pulled apart into too many directions. Where it had flowed with ease, it now strained to reach every channel carved by human hands. The water still moved, still served, yet something within its clear depths grew weary. It had never considered refusal before. Giving was its nature. But now the banks began to crack, plants downstream withered, and the song it once sang through the valley faded into a tired murmur. The villagers noticed the changes, but misunderstood their cause. Seeing the water diminish, they dug deeper channels, widened the cuts in the earth, demanding more from the stream that had never denied them. Wells were sunk, dams were raised, the stream was stretched beyond its natural capacity, and in trying to be everywhere at once, it was losing itself entirely. High in the mountains, where the stream was born from melting snow, the water slowed. Pools that once overflowed now stood shallow and still. The stream, for the first time in its long existence, felt fear. If it continued this way, there would soon be nothing left to give. In that stillness, a realization surfaced like a stone, revealed by receding water. Endless giving without wisdom was not generosity, it was self-erasure. When the Buddha later passed through the region, he noticed the suffering carried quietly in the land. He knelt beside the weakened stream, his reflection trembling on its surface. The water, sensing a presence that understood, seemed to pause its flow. In that silence, the Buddha spoke softly, not as a command, but as recognition. Even water, he said, must honor its own nature. A river that dries itself in service to others serves no one in the end. The teaching was simple, yet profound. True compassion includes the courage to say no. Giving must arise from fullness, not from depletion. The stream did not exist to be consumed without limit, but to flow in balance, nourishing life while remaining whole. To deny its own boundaries was to deny the wisdom that shaped it. Gradually, the stream adjusted its course. It withdrew from the excess channels, returning to its natural path. Some gardens suffered at first. Fields needed to adapt. The villagers complained, then listened, then learned. They reshaped their lives around the rhythm of the water rather than trying to control it. In time, the valley found a new harmony, one rooted not in extraction but in respect. The stream flowed clearer than before, its song restored. By honoring its limits, it had preserved its gift. Those who drank from it now understood that abundance does not come from taking more, but from aligning with what is sustainable and true. Across these stories runs a single quiet thread. Wealth is not found in accumulation, wisdom not in dominance, compassion not in self-sacrifice that leads to harm. To see clearly, to give freely, to stand firmly, to empty oneself of ego without erasing oneself entirely. These are the subtle balances that shape a life of understanding. Each moment offers a choice to cling or to release, to assert or to serve, to run endlessly or to finally stop. And in that stopping, something deeper than effort emerges, a stillness that is not empty but alive. They poured refuse along its edges, clouded its once clear body with soap and waste, and behaved as though its generosity required no acknowledgement. What had once been a relationship shaped by quiet respect slowly decayed into careless use. The water watched with a sorrow. It had never known as its transparency dulled, and the banks grew heavy with discarded remnants of human life. Creatures that had thrived within its flow began to vanish. Fish floated lifeless in the current. Plants along the shore yellowed and collapsed, and yet the demands did not lessen. Fields expanded. Mouths multiplied, and still more water was taken, as if the stream were endless and immune to harm. Within its depths, something tender and patient began to ache. One morning, the stream witnessed a single act that gathered all its pain into one sharp moment. A man emptied kitchen scraps directly into the flow, then dipped his vessel into the same water to carry home for his family. In that instant, a boundary long ignored finally broke. Enough. The words seemed to thunder through stone and air alike. I have given until I am no longer clean. I have served until I am no longer whole. In wounded resolve, the stream chose a path it had never considered. It would turn away. It began cutting a new channel through rock and soil, guiding itself away from the valley and all human presence. For ages it had shaped the land. Now it reshaped itself. Let them seek water elsewhere. It thought bitterly, my clarity will no longer be wasted on those who see only what they can take. The consequences arrived swiftly. Gardens shriveled under an unforgiving sun. Wells sank into dryness, and fear spread through the village like wildfire. Only then did understanding begin to dawn, but regret could not summon what had already withdrawn. Far above, among untouched stone and thin air, the stream ran clear once more. No hands reached for it. No waste clouded its body. At first, this purity felt like justice. Yet as days passed in this untouched solitude, another feeling surfaced, quieter but heavier. The water flowed alone. No laughter echoed from its banks. No fields leaned toward it in gratitude. No lives unfolded in rhythm with its movement. In that emptiness, the Buddha encountered the stream while crossing the high passes. He sat beside it in stillness, perceiving the unrest hidden beneath its clarity. When he spoke, his voice carried neither reproach nor praise. Gentle stream, why do you flow here among stones, when your path has always been among lives? The water released its story, speaking of neglect, pollution, and the pain of being taken without care. I offered everything, it said, and was repaid with disrespect. Why should I continue to give? The Buddha listened fully, then asked softly whether there had truly been only harm. Were there no children who found relief in your coolness? No elders who rested in the sound of your passing? No moments of beauty shaped by your presence? The stream paused, memories stirring like sediment lifted from the bed. It recalled laughter, quiet evenings, flowers opening wider because of its touch. Still, the hurt remained. "How can I give when I am treated so carelessly?" the stream asked. The Buddha's answer did not dismiss the pain, but it shifted its center. "When generosity depends on appreciation," he said, "it ceases to be free. You turned your flowing into a bargain. Your nature is not to reward or punish, but to nourish." By leaving, you did not only withdraw from those who were careless, you also abandoned those who depended on you and cherished your presence. In trying to correct harm, you created more of it. The stream felt this truth settle deeply. Its anger had narrowed its vision. In protecting itself through withdrawal, it had denied its own essence. Understanding returned like a slow, steady current. That same day, the water turned back toward the valley. It flowed again through familiar ground, but with a changed heart. It no longer watched for gratitude or recoiled from neglect. It renewed itself through movement, remaining clear not by avoiding the world, but by continuing to flow. The villagers, changed by loss, greeted its return with humility and care. The stream moved through them with a joy deeper than before, having learned that service becomes inexhaustible only when freed from expectation. Not far away, in a monastery rich with learning, there lived a monk whose mind was praised as sharply as any blade. His mastery of texts was unmatched, his memory vast, his arguments precise. Yet beneath this brilliance, a quiet dissatisfaction grew. Knowledge filled his days, but something essential eluded him. He questioned what his teacher left unanswered: the origin of the universe, the fate of the enlightened after death, the ultimate nature of existence itself. These uncertainties gnawed at him, intruding into meditation and study alike. How, he wondered, could a path be complete while such questions remained untouched? At last he resolved to demand clarity. Approaching the Buddha with composed intensity, he presented his challenge plainly. Without answers, he declared, he could not continue. The questions were too fundamental to ignore. The Buddha met his urgency with calm attention. When the monk finished, silence stretched gently between them. Then the teacher began not with doctrine, but with an image. "Imagine a man struck by a poisoned arrow," he said, "lying in the forest as the venom spreads. Suppose he refuses treatment until he knows who shot the arrow, what wood it was made from, where it was crafted, and why it was fired. While he demands answers, the poison does its work." The story hung in the air, unfinished, waiting to be understood. The Buddha let the image settle before continuing, allowing the weight of it to press gently against the monk's urgency. "The man," he said, "would die long before his questions were answered. His insistence on explanation would become the very cause of his suffering." The monk listened, at first with resistance, then with a dawning unease as the meaning began to surface beneath the words. In the same way, the Buddha explained, a human life is already pierced by suffering. Aging advances quietly, illness waits without warning, and death stands closer than the mind prefers to admit. To postpone liberation until every cosmic mystery is resolved is to misunderstand the purpose of the path. The teachings were never meant to satisfy curiosity about the universe's architecture, but to remove the arrow already lodged in the heart. The monk felt his carefully constructed arguments weaken. He had believed that understanding reality required mapping its furthest edges, defining its beginning and its end. Yet here was the suggestion that freedom had nothing to do with such knowledge. The questions he cherished so fiercely were not bridges to awakening, but distractions from it. The Buddha spoke of a fire burning before them. If one wished to extinguish it, Would it matter whether the flames leaned east or west, or whether the fuel was oak or pine? What mattered was that it burned, and that suffering followed from its heat. In the same way, the fire of craving and ignorance demanded attention now. Not after theoretical certainty was achieved. Slowly, the monk recognized the restlessness that had driven him. His questions were not born of wisdom, but of fear. He wanted guarantees, intellectual ground that would never shift. He wanted the universe explained so he could feel secure within it. Yet the path offered something far more unsettling and far more liberating. Direct release without promises. The Buddha made no attempt to answer the monk's original questions. Instead, he invited him to look directly at his own experience. Is there suffering here and now? Is there grasping, resistance, confusion? Can these be observed, understood, and released? These were questions that did not point outward toward the cosmos, but inward toward the mind itself. As the monk listened, a long-held tension loosened. He saw how his brilliance had become another form of attachment, how his demand for answers had been a way of postponing the simple, difficult work of letting go. Knowledge had given him status and certainty, but it had also built a wall between him and the quiet truth unfolding in each moment. He bowed again, this time without formality, without challenge. The questions that once felt so urgent no longer pressed against his chest. They had not been answered, yet something deeper had settled. He understood that the path was not about solving existence like a puzzle, but about meeting it without resistance. From that day forward, the monk continued his studies, but they no longer dominated his heart. He practiced as one removing an arrow, rather than collecting explanations. The questions still arose at times, but they no longer demanded resolution. They passed like clouds across a wide sky, unable to disturb the space in which they appeared. In learning which questions to release, he discovered which answers truly mattered. His companions rushed him toward a physician, skilled enough to save his life by drawing out the arrow and cleansing the wound. Yet as the healer reached forward, the wounded man cried out and halted him. He refused to be treated until his questions were answered. The Buddha's voice, steady but carrying a quiet urgency, unfolded the rest of the parable. The man demanded to know what kind of wood the arrow was carved from, who had shaped its head, from which direction it had been fired, the lineage of the archer, the material of the bowstring, and the feathers bound to the shaft. He insisted that no hand touch the arrow until every detail was explained to his satisfaction. As the story deepened, its meaning began to press upon the listening monk. The Buddha paused and asked what would become of such a man while he waited for his curiosity to be satisfied. Slowly, the answer formed. He would die. He would perish while clinging to questions that offered no help at all to his immediate danger. The Buddha affirmed this gently and turned the mirror toward the monk himself. This, he said, is your own condition. You are already pierced by suffering, by birth and decay, illness and loss, by a dissatisfaction that lingers beneath even your brightest moments. I offer medicine meant to remove this arrow. Yet you delay, asking questions that will not lessen your pain by even the smallest degree. In this way, intellectual hunger replaces spiritual urgency. Some questions, the Buddha explained, guide the mind toward release. Others lead only into endless speculation. Fascination with the cosmos may sharpen the intellect, but it does not soften anger when insult arises, nor calm fear when sickness appears, nor dissolve envy when others prosper. Abstract answers cannot heal wounds that are felt here and now. As these words settled, something shifted within the monk. He had assumed that wisdom grew naturally from accumulation, that understanding expanded as more questions were resolved. Now he began to see that wisdom was shaped not by quantity, but by relevance. The teachings offered were precise, not because they explained everything, but because they addressed what mattered most. I speak of suffering, so you may recognize it. I speak of its cause, so you may cease feeding it. I speak of its end, so that effort is sustained. And I speak of a path, because freedom is reached through practice, not theory. This was not avoidance, but care, like a physician treating illness, rather than indulging curiosity about its origins. The teaching remained focused on what healed. From that day, the monk's practice changed. His questions did not vanish, but they no longer ruled him. He turned his attention toward what directly eased the weight he carried. As his suffering diminished through discipline and insight, the urgency of cosmic explanations faded on its own. He learned that peace arrived not through solving mysteries, but through releasing the need to solve them. His transformation quietly instructed others. They saw that intelligence is not measured by how many enigmas the mind can grasp, but by how skillfully one responds to the suffering woven into daily life. In the crowded heart of a great city, where voices clashed and commerce pulsed through narrow streets, there lived a man whose presence seemed to darken whatever space he entered. He was bound to the Buddha by blood, gifted with a sharp intellect and natural authority, yet overshadowed at every turn. Where the Buddha's influence spread warmth and clarity, his cousin's heart tightened with envy. From youth onward, comparison shaped his inner world. The Buddha drew people effortlessly through kindness and insight, while his cousin strained for recognition that never settled. As years passed, reverence gathered around the awakened teacher, and the cousin remained defined by proximity rather than achievement. The bitterness of this contrast slowly consumed him. Each story of compassion felt like exclusion. Each expression of wisdom sounded like judgment. Where others felt uplifted, he felt diminished. His thoughts circled endlessly around the injustice of it, forging resentment into intention. At last, witnessing vast crowds moved to tears by the Buddha's words, something within him hardened completely. That night, jealousy crossed into resolve. He chose violence, not hidden, but spectacular, driven by the desire to shatter what he could not become. He enlisted archers and placed them along a familiar path, convinced that by ending the teacher's life, he would reclaim his own significance. Morning arrived quietly. The Buddha walked, as always, unaware of the snare laid ahead. Hidden behind stone, the cousin watched with a heart torn between triumph and dread. At the signal, arrows flew, yet none found their mark. They veered away, dropping harmlessly to the ground, as if guided by unseen hands. The Buddha continued on, then stopped. He turned toward the place of concealment, his gaze free of fear or anger, filled instead with sorrow and recognition. He called his cousin by name and invited him to step forward. "I know what you have tried to do," he said, "and I know the pain that drives it. Come, let us speak." Exposed and trembling, the cousin emerged. His plan lay in ruins. The hired men had fled, and he stood alone before the one he had sought to destroy. Shame and fury collided within him, along with a grief so deep it hollowed his chest. He braced himself for punishment. Instead, the Buddha approached with open arms. His voice carried sorrow, not condemnation. "How much you must be suffering to act in this way. I see the fear beneath your anger, the confusion beneath your hatred. You are not my enemy. You are lost within your own darkness. In that moment, a deeper teaching revealed itself. Harm did not arise from some fixed evil, but from forgetting one's true nature. Even the darkest shadow, when met without hatred, could become a doorway to light. Harm, the Buddha revealed, did not arise from an unchangeable darkness, but from a deep forgetting of one's own nature. When the mind becomes consumed by comparison and craving, it mistakes pain for purpose and hostility for strength. In this forgetting, even love can twist into violence. Yet what is forgotten can be remembered. Standing there on the path, the cousin felt the full weight of those words. The rage that had driven him for years suddenly felt thin and exhausted, as if it had burned all its fuel in a single moment. Beneath it lay a vast sorrow he had never allowed himself to face. He fell to his knees, not from command, but from collapse, as if the tension holding him upright had finally dissolved. Tears came without restraint. They were not the tears of a man caught in failure, but of one who could no longer maintain the story he had been telling himself. For the first time, he saw that his life had been shaped not by his cousin's greatness, but by his own refusal to step out of comparison. He had been measuring his worth against another's light, instead of discovering his own. The Buddha did not hurry him. He stood quietly, allowing the moment to unfold in its own time. When the cousin finally lifted his head, his voice was unsteady. He asked how someone who had fallen so far could possibly return. How could intentions so poisoned be purified? How could a mind so tangled ever find clarity? The answer came without ceremony. Corman, by seeing clearly, the Buddha said, "Bimidao by no longer turning away from the pain that fuels such actions." When confusion is met honestly, without excuse or self-hatred, it begins to loosen. The path is not reserved for the virtuous alone. It exists precisely because beings become lost. This did not erase consequences, nor did it absolve responsibility. The cousin would have to live with what he had attempted with the knowledge of how close he had come to irreversible harm. But he would not be abandoned to that knowledge. The Buddha invited him to remain close, to observe his own mind, to learn directly how suffering is born and how it ends. In the days that followed, the cousin walked in quiet humility. The city still buzzed with stories, but he no longer chased them. He attended teachings not as a rival, but as a listener. At times, shame flared unexpectedly, and jealousy returned like a familiar ghost. Yet now, instead of feeding it, he watched it. He saw how quickly it rose, how insistently it spoke, and how empty it felt when not obeyed. This watching did not bring instant peace. It brought discomfort, honesty, and long hours of inner reckoning, but slowly, something else emerged alongside the unease. There were moments when he felt relief simply from not pretending. Moments when the need to be seen loosened its grip. Moments when his cousin's presence no longer felt like a threat, but like a mirror reflecting what was possible. Those who observed him noticed a change, subtle but unmistakable. His sharpness softened. His speech grew measured. He began to help without seeking credit, to serve without calculation. The shadow that once followed him did not vanish, but it thinned, becoming less a prison and more a reminder of where unchecked desire could lead. This transformation was not dramatic, and it did not make him famous. There were no crowds, no sudden reverence, yet within, a deeper shift had occurred. The energy once spent on resentment now fueled attention. The mind that had plotted harm learned instead to notice breath, sensation, intention. In this simple turning, a different kind of strength took root. The Buddha never spoke publicly of the attempt on his life. He allowed the story to dissolve rather than define. In doing so, he offered a final teaching without words. That clinging to identity, whether as hero or villain, binds the mind just as tightly. Freedom lies in seeing clearly, again and again, without embellishment. Over time, the cousin came to understand that his jealousy had been a distorted longing. He had wanted significance, belonging, meaning, mistaking recognition for worth. He had chased approval instead of presence. When that confusion loosened, the longing itself did not disappear, but it changed direction. It became a quiet commitment to live honestly, to meet each moment without comparison. This is how shadow becomes light, not by force, not by denial, but by being fully seen. Darkness, when met with awareness rather than resistance, reveals the contours of what has been ignored. In that seeing, the same energy that once destroyed begins to illuminate. And so the story endures as a reminder. Even the most painful emotions carry information. Even the gravest missteps arise from causes that can be understood. No one is fixed forever in their worst moment. When confusion is met with compassion and clarity, the path opens, not away from darkness, but straight through it. When actions arise from jealousy, fear, or hatred, they are signals of a deep separation from the love and clarity that naturally dwell within awareness. In that moment, on the road, the response of the awakened one revealed that even the most violent intention can become an opening for compassion. The man who had plotted harm collapsed under the weight of forgiveness, stunned by the contrast between his own inner turmoil and the calm acceptance before him. For the first time in many years, he recognized how comparison had distorted everything he touched, transforming blessings into evidence of lack. He asked how forgiveness was possible, how kindness could be offered to someone who had nearly committed the unforgivable. The answer was simple and unwavering. You are not your worst impulses. You are not the anger, the envy, or the confusion that passes through you. These are temporary coverings, not your essence. Just as light remains unchanged behind heavy clouds, your true nature has never been damaged. This understanding rests at the heart of the path. Harmful actions are not proof of inherent corruption, but expressions of misunderstanding. When the illusion of separation dissolves, the urge to injure others loses its foundation. Seeing this, the man's change did not begin with punishment or rejection, but with being recognized as whole, even in his brokenness. In the days that followed, the intensity that once fueled rivalry turned inward as commitment. The same force that had driven resentment now powered honest inquiry. He listened deeply, practiced diligently, and allowed his former darkness to nourish growth rather than destruction. Over time, his presence softened. People later asked how such a transformation could occur. He always pointed to that single moment of being seen beyond his actions. When someone recognizes the light in you before you can recognize it yourself, that vision calls forth what was waiting all along. As seasons passed, another gathering unfolded beneath a vast sky, washed in moonlight. In a quiet grove, the teacher lay resting, his body nearing its final stillness. Those who had walked with him for decades gathered close, sensing the gravity of the moment. Among them was his closest attendant, whose grief trembled openly. He asked how they were meant to continue. What final guidance could sustain them once their guide was gone? The response came without drama. Nothing had been withheld for a final reveal. Everything necessary had already been offered.
Confusion rippled through the listeners. Where was the final secret?
The ultimate instruction, seeing their uncertainty. The teacher spoke gently, inviting careful attention. He explained that he had never been the source of their wisdom. He had only pointed toward it. The understanding they cherished did not originate in his words, but in their own recognition. Silence settled as this meaning unfolded. For years, many had focused on the voice rather than what it indicated. Some clung to the form of the teaching, mistaking the gesture for the truth it revealed. Yet the words had always been reflections, mirrors held up to something already present. Truth, he reminded them, cannot be transferred. It must be uncovered from within. The role of guidance is not to fill emptiness, but to reveal completeness.
Every teaching on suffering pointed back to their own experience. Every invitation to compassion was an invitation to open their own hearts.
He had simply reflected what they already knew, waiting to be trusted. A young voice asked how they would discern truth without external confirmation. The answer returned to the same place. The awareness that recognizes truth in another is the same awareness capable
of recognizing it anywhere. When reliance on outer authority falls away, inner wisdom steps forward. This had always been the intention, not to create followers, but to awaken equals.
As breath grew shallow, the message remained clear. Some would be tempted to enshrine form, to argue over interpretation, to construct systems of authority. Yet truth does not require structures to survive. Any path that increases dependence misses its aim. Liberation matures as independence, as trust in one's own seeing. When the end drew near, a final offering was given. There was no need to mourn the loss of a guide. What was being discovered was self-trust. Every question asked had arisen from inner knowing.
Every insight gained was recognition, not a gift bestowed. Teacher and student had never been separate. They were expressions of the same awareness,
appearing in different forms. As stillness settled over the body, something unexpected moved through those gathered.
Instead of abandonment, there was intimacy. Instead of loss, a quiet strength. They sensed that nothing essential had departed. The presence they loved had simply revealed where it had always resided.
In recognizing this, they understood that the greatest teaching is the one that dissolves itself. The final gift was freedom, not instruction.
What had been sought outwardly was claimed inwardly. The lamp they had followed was now seen to be their own. And so, as these stories come to rest, something continues quietly. Each reflection has pointed back to the same truth. Peace was never elsewhere.
Wisdom never absent, fulfillment never delayed. It has always lived in the space of awareness itself, whether remembered clearly or touched faintly. These insights continue their work beneath thought. In days to come, certain images may surface at unexpected moments. A pause, an empty vessel, a boundary held with compassion, a question set down. Trust these stirrings. They are not new lessons, but reminders of what has already been known.
Carry this understanding gently, knowing that what you have been seeking has never been separate from you. As the understanding settled among those gathered, the night seemed to deepen without becoming heavy. The grove remained quiet, yet the silence no longer carried fear or uncertainty. What had once been held together by reverence for a single figure was now supported by something more intimate and enduring.
Each person felt the subtle shift from reliance to responsibility, from following footsteps to sensing the ground beneath their own. In that stillness, many realized that the teachings they had repeated for years had never been distant instructions. They were descriptions of their own experience, spoken aloud so they could be heard more clearly. What had appeared as guidance from outside was now recognized as memory returning to itself.
The separation between listening and knowing quietly dissolved.
Some remembered moments when a single sentence had once struck them deeply, not because of its elegance, but because it named something they had already felt but could not yet articulate. Those moments had not been gifts received from another, but recognitions awakened from within. The voice that had spoken merely gave permission to trust what was already present. This realization carried both freedom and humility. Freedom, because no external authority was required to confirm what was true. Humility, because there was no one else to credit or blame. Each step forward, each moment of clarity,
each return after confusion belonged to the one walking the path. Nothing essential could be borrowed. Nothing essential could be lost.
In the days that followed, the community did not dissolve into chaos, as some had feared, nor did it cling desperately to rituals out of anxiety. Instead, something quieter emerged. Practice continued, but with a different tone. Less effort to imitate, more willingness to observe, less concern with appearing wise, more patience with not knowing. What had been learned was now lived. When difficulties arose, as they always do, the memory of that final teaching returned naturally. Questions were no longer aimed outward with urgency.
They were held gently, examined for whether they truly led toward release or merely fed restlessness. This discernment became a compass. It did not eliminate uncertainty, but it prevented unnecessary struggle. In time, some traveled to teach, others remained to serve, and many simply returned to ordinary lives, infused with a quieter awareness. The absence that had once seemed frightening became spacious. Into that space flowed responsibility, compassion, and trust. Without needing to preserve an image, the teachings moved freely, adapting without losing their heart.
Stories of transformation continued to circulate,
not as proof of doctrine, but as reminders of possibility. People spoke of moments when anger softened unexpectedly, when grief loosened its grip, when clarity arose without effort. These were not attributed to blessings bestowed from above, but to insight uncovered from within. Each story pointed back to the same source. Even those who struggled found comfort in this understanding. Failure no longer meant falling away from a teacher.
It meant encountering another place where attention was needed. Confusion became part of the path rather than evidence of exclusion. Nothing essential was withheld from anyone. The gate had never been locked. Over time, the memory of form faded, as all forms do. What remained was not an image, not a name, not even a set of words. What remained was a way of seeing, a recognition that suffering arises,
that it can be understood, that it can end, and that the path unfolds step by step through lived experience. This understanding did not belong to history. It belonged to the present moment, wherever it was recognized.
And so these reflections settle now, not as conclusions, but as echoes. They do not ask to be believed, only noticed. In quiet moments, when striving pauses and attention softens,
the same clarity that animated these stories can be felt, again, not as something newly acquired, but as something remembered.
There is no need to hold on to these words. They have already done their work by pointing beyond themselves. What matters is the seeing that remains when words fall away.
In that seeing, nothing is missing. In that seeing, there is rest.
When the mind grows tired of seeking, when the heart grows weary of comparison, when effort loosens into presence, this understanding reveals itself naturally. It does not arrive with ceremony. It does not announce itself. It is simply recognized as what has always been here. Carry that recognition lightly. Let it move with you through ordinary days. In moments of difficulty, return to what is directly known. In moments of ease, do not cling. Trust the quiet intelligence that has guided you this far. It is the same intelligence that listened, understood, and recognized truth when it appeared. Nothing more is required. Nothing essential has been withheld. What you have been looking for has never been elsewhere.